what they have accomplished and what they have produced as far as the future land use map and policies that we hope to send forward to the Mayor and Commission. After we get these summaries, we'll have time for discussion among the Planning Commission members. After that discussion, we will have time for public input. Anyone who is wishing to make public input at that time will be asked to come to the podium, give your name, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. Keep an eye on the traffic lights right there. It'll go yellow when you're about to run out of time, and when it's red, you'll have to step away. While you are speaking, we ask the audience to please refrain from jeering, applauding, making a lot of noise. And for everyone's awareness, this meeting is being recorded. So please speak forward while you are making your comments so that it can be picked up by the microphones. And for everyone else, these microphones can be kind of sensitive, so please refrain from talking, making a lot of noise, and silence your cell phones. For those of you doing the meeting remotely, you will find the meeting agenda on the Planning Department website at accgov.com/planning. And those of you who are attending in person have had a chance to receive one of the agendas that were handed out by planning staff. With that, Bruce.
Thank you. We typically present to the Planning Commission, but what I'm going to do tonight is maybe stand up a little bit, walk around. I know when Mark is talking, we're going to kind of interact a little bit more. This is a work session format, slightly less formal. I do want to reinforce Sarah's point about the public comment. We want to hear from folks, but we want to make sure we have time to hear from everybody. So that's why we're having that little bit of rigor about the 3-minute time limit. I will say this, to the extent that we're able tonight, if a question arises that we can answer tonight, we want to do that. If there is something that we need to take away and look into to provide an answer, we may have to do that, but we'll let you know. Everything that we hear from the podium is meaningful. So what we can answer tonight, we want to. What we can't, we promise to look into and provide that answer the best way possible. Okay. I'm going to go fairly quickly from what I had prepared to kind of get us on track. The main thing I want to point out is the steering committee's work. This was a group that was appointed by the mayor to begin work. They had their first meeting April 30th of 2024. They met monthly plus for 14 months. This was a group of folks that really leaned in to the charge that they were given by the mayor to listen, learn, find out about the community in ways that they'd never heard before. Where do we have sewer? Where don't we have sewer? Where do we have traffic issues? Where do we have opportunities for growth? And where do we have some spots we need to leave alone because we can't serve those areas properly? We talked about all of that. And with that information, we also folded in all the public input that we heard in 2023 in the fall. And that produced, it'll be on the screen in a minute, that produced a setting guiding principles and a growth concept map. I want to focus on the guiding principles. There were 5 guiding principles. And they are on one of these boards, I swear they are. In the hallway. But those 5 guiding principles have lasted through this entire process. It was to make good use of our infrastructure, to do no harm with our environment, to cut down on trips through our community by bringing growth to areas that can handle it, but then also to put destinations closer to where people live. So you just don't have to rely on a car to get to a doctor or to get to the bank or to do anything. Nobody goes to the bank anymore, right? That's a bad example. But to do that, do you go to the bank? Thank you. All right. So to do the things you have to do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, you shouldn't have to go entirely to the west side or entirely to the east side. We should start to look at these pockets of communities within our community to find some efficiencies. And they did. So here's what they produced after 14 months worth of work, 2 rounds of public input, one at the beginning that kicked them off in the spring of 2024 and one that just wrapped up in the spring of 2025. What they are sending forward to the Planning Commission is really entirely represented on this one board. A lot of work though. It's a brand new future land use map. It's a brand new future land use map that translates those guiding principles that translates a growth concept map that the community said that they valued. And they wrote largely new words and categories to explain this orderly growth that they think is appropriate for the next 20 years. So there's a few things to remember in there. This is a 20-year plan. This is not something that's going to be built in 18 months. It's meant to be a long play. It's meant to organize us for a generation. So the things that are on here, we may have some things that happen quickly. That'd be great to have proof in the pudding right away. But we may have some things that take the full 20 years to play out. And having been here for the big rewrite of a future land use plan 25 years ago, we're just now seeing the end of the build out of that future land use map from 25 years ago. So that's really how it works. So this is a policy document. It's a new map, it's new words, and those are the recommendations that are coming from the steering committee, nothing more. There is a report that's going to come out that explains the story of how it was created. And that's coming out probably next couple of weeks. So you'll be able to see and you'll be able to dig into detail, all the detail you'd ever want, frankly. But tonight, the point of this is to talk about the process that was followed, to get the planning commissioners comfortable with the story of how this was created, and then to talk about next steps for this group to think through those recommendations and have a schedule for that. So I'm glad you're here to hear that discussion. I'm going to stop right there. And Chair, I'm going to hand it off to the Future Land Use Steering Committee Chair, Alex Sams.
Thanks, Bruce. You took half of everything I was going to say, so this will be good for everybody here. That's a ramble. But there are a couple of things, and I'm going to speak primarily about the steering committee, which I was chair of. And I'm not going to name all the people on it. It's a large list, but we had, I'd say, most of the people showed up all the time. When they didn't show up to our meetings, they had a reason. We met from basically spring of 2024 until this June, so summer of 2025, monthly, sometimes weeks in a row if we needed to. Sometimes we took a little time off if there was a need for a pause, where staff would get some of our notes together. And but something that I told Bruce when I agreed to do this was I got an understanding of what we were supposed to do, and I got an understanding, I already knew what the future land use map was, of course, but I told him it had to be the committee's map. And this, I want y'all to understand, and I definitely need y'all to understand this. This is not staff's map. They had a right. There's no law that says there has to be a steering committee. They could have, mayor and commission and staff could have done this whole thing, but they chose to bring a committee into this of citizens to do this and go through the process so that it came from a committee of citizens. And that's what we are. So if you don't like the map, it starts with me. It's going to be my fault. Then I'm going to blame the committee. But staff did take all of everything we talked about in every meeting. They would go do their staff thing and bring it all together and bring it back to the next meeting. So we would see what we did in an orderly fashion. And so for the first couple of, I don't even remember, but a couple of months worth of meetings, we met with groups and entities in the community. We learned about what Chamber of Commerce feels and needs. We learned what hospitals feel in need, what educational institutions feel in need. And when I say feel, it's just what they need and believe they need in the future. Because again, we kept having to think what we see today is not necessarily, well, it's not what we're here to do. We're here to build a map that carries us for 20 years. And that's what that map is going to be. So we did, but prior to that, in 2023, that fall, y'all may remember, and y'all know y'all do, that staff had meetings all over town where they would bring groups in and they would do exercises to try to find out what the citizens wanted out of their community, where they wanted growth, if they had growth, what it would look like. And so that was compiled and then brought later to the Future Land Use Steering Committee. And we saw that, and then we heard from the public. And then we finally got to sit down and start working and start the grind of the language, of the categories. Do we take this category and leave it in that name, or do we redefine it, or do we break it up into other categories? And so you'll notice that there are more categories in this draft of the future land use map for the future than there were in the past. There's no right or wrong. That's just what we felt the community would need, and anyone looking at this map would need to better understand what we were doing. So we put all of that together, and without boring you with all of the details, but the meetings were in the middle of the afternoon. When I chair something, we leave when the meeting is over. I don't do a stopwatch, and from 2 to 4, we leave at 4 no matter what. We leave when business is over. And so some of those meetings did go over 4. But it was because we were going and everybody wanted to stay. And my policy was always, if you have to leave, you go ahead and leave. We're adults. So we went through all of that and then and came up with this. Now, there was another thing that I think is important, and my goal as chair, and it always is to build a comfortable environment, an atmosphere. If the people at the meeting aren't comfortable talking, then it's not the right feeling. They're on the committee so that we can hear from them. It doesn't mean they have to speak every single meeting. Some people have points that they want to speak about, or that they're interested in, or that maybe they know more about. Some people we had a loan officer, and that was always the person that we needed to speak up when we talked about financing of this or that. But I wanted the atmosphere to be the atmosphere that people were comfortable coming to the meeting and comfortable speaking at the meeting. So I think we did achieve that. Engagement is important. And I will even say it doesn't bother me, and I sometimes like it, and I don't mean in a bad way, but if the temperature rises in a conversation, if somebody has a little bit of a hot point and somebody else is maybe they're not agreeing, I think it's important to not extinguish that immediately. Let it rise a little bit, and sometimes it'll sharpen what we end up with. So we did that, and we did that pretty well. Another thing that I had told Bruce, and this went forward, was that we didn't really have a deadline time limit. This map had to be delivered. There were thoughts, we'd like it then, this would be good if so, but it was important to me and the committee that we just got it done, and we heard enough, and we got through all of our conversations until we got to the point where we were ready to go. So I think we did a good job at that. There's another thing, and I'm just going to kind of hit it. Bruce already said it, and it's going to come up, but just speaking for me as a member of the committee and not as chair, and I see it on some notes that staff had, localized trips. And this was something that I really began to feel and learn and understand. We talk about walkability, we talk about bikeability, and to some extent, but not really much, short drivability. And that is not necessarily a term we talk about a lot, but Bruce hit on this a little bit. If you live in, say, 5 Points, Beechwood area, it's good if you can get most of your work done or driving done right there, or at least your day-to-day resources. So that's what we're talking about, and that's what the map's going to show and the language is going to show a lot of. You shouldn't have to always drive 5 miles to go get bread and milk. In other words, if you live in certain areas, obviously, if you live way out on the exterior of the town, that's a little different. But you'll sort of feel that it's that we're going to talk nodes, and we're going to talk town centers, and we're going to talk these things. But the whole thing is you shouldn't have to drive a long way for your provisions. It'd be nice if you can go a short distance. And if you do want to drive a further distance for something special, that's fine. But and then that creates an atmosphere too where biking and walking is a little bit easier. And I've said on another committee, e-bikes, just e-bikes or electric bikes, That's going to change the perspective of a lot of things. We didn't really get into that here, but an easy way to move without getting in a car, a little more distance. That's what future land use is trying to prepare for, something we don't really know about yet, but we need to be somewhat accurate. I'm jumping from one note to another, but that is the feeling of this. And again, I do want the Planning Commission to understand it. And since we're sort of talking to the audience as well, this is the citizens, the group of citizens put this together. It's not staff. Don't get mad at them for anything you see up there. Come to me if you want to, if you're not happy. I appreciate what staff has done. We couldn't have done it without their ability to combine and put all of this together, but these are our notes. We've reviewed everything that's up there. We've okayed it, and we're ready for it to go further and finally make it up here to the Planning Commission. So that is everything I need to mostly cover. I'm going to hand it over, well, back to the chair, and then, but just know I hit high. We're going to come into some details next, and you're going to see a lot of slides and a lot of things that are going to bring it all together so you get to hear and know exactly what this is, because a lot of people don't even know what a future land use map even is. And that's understandable. 5 years ago, I didn't know what one was. Thank you.
Can I let that be my handoff? For the purpose?
Yeah, you got more? Yes.
There we go. What a future land use map is, let's just start right there. I can tell you what it's not. So what it is not is a zoning map. There's not a regulation that's going to be represented on the future land use map. So that begs the question, okay, so why are we doing this? What's the point? Whenever you do anything that leads to a law, you want to have proper research in the first place to make sure that the law you're passing is relevant, that it is addressing your community's concerns, and that it is substantial and can be substantiated. So this future land use map is a policy. It's a policy document. It's a path forward, and it helps arrange things. Now, in Athens-Clarke County, unlike other counties in Georgia, when we pass the future land use map, we don't sit on it for 10 years. We have the opportunity through ordinance that if we find a reason that it needs to be changed, we have a process locally to change it. So as important as this policy document is and the work that we're doing right now to put it together, one of the things that's unique about Athens-Clarke County is we are able legally to revisit it faster than 10 years. And we have a public process for doing so. We go through 2 rounds of comment, right? And we make an applicant make their case about why the future land use map needs to be amended to, here's an opportunity that maybe popped up that nobody realized, right? And maybe it's a good thing. And maybe it's a reason for us to change that policy document. So our county commission will take 2 votes, and you'll sometimes see them do this. They'll take a first vote to change the future land use map. And that unlocks a door to then be able to consider the change in zoning. If they don't pass the change to the future land use map, the vote on the zoning never happens. So this map is powerful. It's a policy document, but is it law? No, it's not. Is it zoning? No, it's not. It's a statement of goals. It's a wish list, but it's an educated wish list. And that's what we want everybody to understand is this is us trying to express community values in a map. So those community values include things like rural preservation. These community values include things like neighborhood stabilization. Community values also include traffic reduction and increasing opportunity for growth. The minute we don't grow is when we're going to have some other real big problems. So we need to manage the growth. And so that is the purpose of this. And the steering committee was put together to thoughtfully check this process. Other communities don't necessarily do it this way. Athens, we're special. And I like it like that. I like the fact that we engage people and we don't try to get things done in 3 months. Legally, we could have. That's not the right way to do it. So this is where we are in this process, having come through kind of a robust community input and engagement. It's now to kind of take that engagement to the next step to the Planning Commission, who's appointed by the Mayor and Commission to do exactly this kind of work. A lot of times they do site-specific things, but also in their purview are these larger policy documents. and they don't often get the chance to dig into these kinds of things. But this, this sets the course for this board and future planning commissions in the future to be able to gauge growth and to look at those site-specific requests and make sure they're rational. Are they checking down against those community values? So that's, I think, what I need to say about purpose.
Okay, thank you for all that introduction there. I will say, well, feel free to send Alex as much correspondence as you would like. Mark Pichuk, please send stuff our ways. We'll get it to Alex, or if you've got other questions, I'd be happy to help out. So thank you all.
No one was listening to me anyway. I was brave about that.
Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of background about how we got here, and then we're going to really go into the maps a lot more. And I hope we can get my part done relatively quickly here so we can hear from all of you and hear what the Planning Commission has to say. So why are we going through this? Trying to determine where development density can be realistically increased. I'm going to give the answer right now. We're shooting at about less than 6% of the community. So we're going to get to that map, but I want to tell you, part of this is to use space efficiently. And if we can do that, we can keep a lot of everything we absolutely love. I think we'll also be building things that many of us will love in the future, and opportunities for future residents, for your children, grandchildren, everyone who wants to enjoy the classic city. So what are the possible trade-offs? There's going to be trade-offs. That's part of what we have to deal with. We're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure here and what balance we have to deal with that. But there are things that will be traded off in terms of changing these. But what we want that to be is good for that potential change, but also good for everyone who lives around that. We do not want to displace people. We do not want to uproot people and make lives difficult for folks. We want to find that balance between those things. We'd also like to look at how affordability and quality design can both be achieved. That last one gets in a little bit to the zoning. And as mentioned here, we're not talking about zoning, but we know zoning's coming. So some of the things that we looked at there, this thing was working a second ago. You click on it to see. Okay. Okay, I'll give it a go here. So we've got a future land use map right now. This is our future land use map as it exists today. What we're going to be showing you is what we're calling the 2045 future land use map. This is a 20-year look out into the future. But you can see there, we've got 9 future land use categories currently. A lot of what we did was changing the intention, the characterization of some of those things. Some of those things aren't changing. Downtown is downtown. We heard the steering committee say that over and over again. Downtown is staying downtown. So employment is where a lot of our big job sectors are. And by big jobs, we're talking office space, industrial space, things like that. We obviously have a major job source right here in the center of our community at the University of Georgia. General business today is a fairly auto-oriented style of future land use category. You can see that along a lot of our major corridors. We're going to focus in on that quite a bit so that we can be a little bit more intentional as we move forward and as zoning code changes happen. We've got our government zone that gets broken up into government, education, and parks and open space. So we'll show that. Main Street business is that localized, smaller scale. Mixed density residential is our multifamily zones. We've got our rural green belts that we are looking to keep strong and mostly intact. And then we've got 2 more of our regular residential categories that we think of: single family residential and traditional neighborhood. The breakdown there is a little bit more of the in-town versus the out-of-town. Now, I will show you this map when we get into those, but both of those are being carried forward. So single family is more of just the single family detached product. Traditional neighborhood is more of that in-town product where you might have a townhouse next to a house, or you might have a house that gets broken up into, you know, an apartment, like some of the old Victorian stuff, things like that. But it is still predominantly a lot of single family detached products still to this day.
This is not the map that's in your handouts.
Correct. This is what we're working with today. So. Okay, so in terms of guiding conditions, one of the first groups we talked to was our Public Utilities Department. Our infrastructure is incredibly important. And so we talked with them, we talked with Transportation Public Works, we talked with Leisure Services, we talked with our Economic Development Department, and we came up with a few guiding conditions. And you can think of these as sort of rigid to a little bit more malleable as we go across the screen from left to right. So our natural environment, our topography, rivers, buffers, not going to be changing a lot of those. That's really hard to change We don't want to change those things. Those are things we work around. Our built environment, we have put in place, but very expensive usually to change. So we are trying as best as we can to work with that built environment. We are quite blessed to have a highly gravity-based sewer system. We currently have one lift station. We should have another one coming online probably this year. And we have looked at, a potential for one more, but that's very unique for a community of 130,000 residents. So changing that is feasible. Changing roads, not usually the greatest idea. It's a little bit tough. Changing the sewer system and the water system, sometimes we can add to that. But again, something we're pretty firm on, but something that does have the potential to be changed, something that definitely needs maintenance, very high cost here in the built environment. But also some things like amenities, like our greenways and trails that, we see that through community values. All the way down to our policy side on the right-hand side. So this is the easiest to change, but this takes all the political will, right? This is the reason people come and speak and why our commissioners are hopefully hearing all those things. And while they're listening in, we had a meeting right before this and we're happy to have a few commissioners there. So wonderful for folks to be able to do that. So easier to change, but a lot of political will coming out of that to try and change it. You trying to help me there? Thanks. In terms of some of the big ideas, the numbers are showing us that growth pressure will remain constant. We've been at a fairly steady 1% growth rate since before the 1970s. That notion shows that about 30,000 new residents could be here by 2045. So how do we accommodate the space? Again, we're hoping about 6% of the community can do the heavy lifting. We would like a little bit of lifting throughout the rest of the community, but we're going to get there. So 30,000, that's a lot. That's substantial. But again, as Bruce said, we're talking 20 years. So hopefully that filters in nicely, comes into the system. Those people can be put into the community, absorbed without a whole lot of pain or pressure, and put into ways that are beneficial for them to come to the community and be valuable residents and citizens and business owners and things like that, but also provide good opportunities for the existing community that's already here and wants to maintain the high standards that we have. Housing variety and availability needs to increase. For many years, we've built apartments really well. We've built single family houses really well. We haven't done everything in between there a whole lot. And so the mismatch of the housing structure and type versus the average home buyer and resident now has shifted quite a bit. That process has been going on since the end of World War II. Since the 90s, there's been a lot of thinking about redoing that. You've probably seen urbanism throughout many cities across the country. Definitely in the Southeast here, we have urbanism coming back, but we also have pressure coming in because of the affordable living, the wonderful life, the wonderful weather, things like that. So we've got sort of a double pressure there. So we need to find that we're getting the proper amount of housing, the proper type of housing to satisfy all the different people that will be here. That's people coming in and people who exist here today. And then lastly, we do need to work on replacement of expensive and aging infrastructure, hopefully before we go out and expand it a bit more. So we began in the fall of 2023. We had 26 public events. We had community walks. We had sit-down events. We did an east side and a west side bus tour. We tabled at a few events, and we even got out into the schools to hear from what some of the youth are thinking about and what they would love to see in our community. That provided about 2,000, a little over 2,000 responses there. You can see quite a bit about the right-of-way. So everyone thinks of the street, but there's a little bit beyond that street that is part of the street network that can incorporate sidewalks and street trees. But that also incorporates the front yard of a lot of places. So this is where we get a lot of interaction between cars, people, movement, business fronts, all of those things. So it was really interesting to get a lot of that. I think it's because we did some of those community walks. People were experiencing that a little bit differently than they may have, or coming out because they were excited about that. We heard a lot about open space and landscaping. We heard this from the steering committee a lot. Make sure as we grow, we're keeping those spaces that everyone needs to be able to, spread out and breathe a little bit once in a while. We did hear a lot about residential. A lot of the things that the Planning Commission and the Planning Department deals with is how do we accommodate residential properly and efficiently around town. So a big point that we heard a lot from. But if you put all those three together, we're looking at, almost 60% of the comments that came out of that. So a lot of good stuff that we then built off of. We had these sit-down meetings, so we had some creative engagements that got people thinking a little bit differently. We had a presentation and Q&A. Appreciate everyone who came out to those. We did some neighborhood walks, so we got to engage and see that built form, possibly from a new viewpoint. We got to demonstrate how things are currently arranged within our growth pressure. So walking along the street is a little bit different than driving, so you kind of understand that pressure a little bit differently. And then the consideration of how the right-of-way impacts everything that surrounds it. 2 bus tours were very interesting, allowed us to see a whole range of development on the east side and the west side, see how things are connected. A lot of what we're looking here for is also to make good connections. And then at the tabling, we got a lot more general comments. We got to meet people out where they were at. And then in the schools, engaging the youth and thinking creatively was a great benefit. From that input, the function, mixed use, we heard a lot about mixed use. And again, a lot of what we're talking about in that approximately 6% of the community is finding ways to mix uses a little bit better. To put people close to those things they need, as Bruce stated earlier, to give people options for transportation trips, to get people to school, to get people to jobs a little bit easier and not have to go across town. In terms of form, we heard a lot about design standards. We heard that from the steering committee a lot, something that's going to be looked at as we go forward. A lot of people like this idea of a human scale. So a lot of people in the planning world see that as 2.5 stories. We don't see a whole heck of a lot of half-story buildings all the time. So 2 to 3 stories is generally considered to be that human scale that you can walk by and feel safe and that it's not overbearing. Parking, we've got a lot of extra parking. We've got a lot of parking in front of areas that could be used in a better fashion. Setbacks, again, gets to zoning. That neighborhood blend, that context sensitivity, very important. Utilizing shared parking arrangements inside these business districts where possible. That could be structured, that could be on street, that could be a designated lot, as opposed to every single business having to have a maximum amount of parking. It allows for those businesses to expand a little bit more and bring more value to our community. Downtown is downtown. We want it to stay historic and be the core of this community. And then we heard a lot about the cluster nodal development. So that's where we kind of went towards. You'll see that in a minute. Again, scale, variety, opportunities for senior housing, opportunities for more housing, density where it's appropriate, and affordability on the residential side. In terms of commercial vacancy, we've got a reasonable amount of commercial vacancy. We've had a lot of changing commercial patterns over the years that we could account for and hopefully get people into those locations a little bit better. That commercial vacancy is often very close to all those things that I just mentioned that people need on a daily basis. Everyone loves good restaurants, so it's always nice to talk about food with people. We heard a bit about that. Making sure that commercial is small and local so that people who want to create businesses can, that money is recirculating in the community. We didn't just hear about trees, we heard about trees, trees, and trees over and over again. So we are a very hefty tree city. We are doing quite a bit of work, but you probably have all seen new development come in, and that development often takes away quite a few trees. It takes a long time to get them back. So ways we can preserve and ways we can get stuff in. Activating green space, getting to parks, if that's smaller and on a neighborhood scale or closer to where everyone is. Everyone enjoys a connection to water. I shouldn't say everyone, but the notion of being close to water and being able to utilize that good, preservation of that green belt. And then we even heard about some parts on the edge of town that have that agricultural opportunity, have some of those other outdoor recreational. People wanted to see institutions as neighborhood centers, so opportunities there to talk with our school districts. There are a lot of these used. A lot of people go play basketball, tennis, or use ball fields at a lot of these places, a lot of after-school programs and things like that for family members. And then obviously making sure that medical is spread around. Again, that's a little bit more of a zoning code, but we heard that a lot. In terms of the right-of-way, safety, considering traffic, multiple options for transportation, dealing with topography. If we're going to be serious about those opportunities, we're going to have to realize that a lot of people aren't just going to bike up and down a lot of the hills that we have throughout this town. So finding ways to make good connections and put those people together, being able to walk places, being able to use our transit system, and hopefully one day have a train network here. So Bruce went over these guiding principles, but real quickly, redevelop those corridors and nodes, and we'll show that on the map. Minimize that sewer expansion, high cost to sewer expansion. You need high value things around sewer expansion to pay for it. So keeping ourselves economically sustainable as a community. That's, the bottom line for Athens-Clarke County. We want to keep that in the black. Grow that capacity. So if we're going to minimize that expansion, we need to grow that capacity within the network. We need to do that wisely. Reducing travel distance. And then this is the small one. So I talked about that 6%, but this number 4 on here, small amounts of incremental growth in all neighborhoods that are served by sewer. So this is that idea that everyone can do a little bit of a lift. And so we're not just putting people on the corridors. We're not just putting people in the nodes. We're doing a little bit everywhere around, and that can come in a variety of forms that would also, again, speak to the zoning code. And I'll speak a little bit more about that as we get into some of the finer points of the future land use categories. Lastly, support environmentally and fiscally sustainable growth. So out of that effort, the growth concept map was born. These nodes that are the blobs on the paper there are areas we are focusing. That's a lot of the areas the steering committee ended up focusing on. The gray dotted lines are our corridors that they also focused on. And then you'll see the green dotted line, which is our trail system. So the Greenway and the Firefly Trail. There are opportunities for small things to be done along those, for alternative transportation networks and alternative options to be used there to help people get around and experience the community. You can see a lot of the green belt is still maintained. You can see a little bit more of the in-town area versus where it gets a little bit more suburban in the gray and then gets to the rural. So we kind of looked at this, and we think the context of these different areas and the neighborhoods that are within them should be treated a little bit differently. They should be thought about a little bit differently. They should probably have a few different uses and functions. A lot of them are going to have some of the basics. So we're going to have housing. We're going to have, hopefully things to get your groceries at and your pharmacies and things like that. Small office opportunities, stuff like that. But you can drive around and you can see this, and this is common throughout all developed cities in the United States. That pre-war development in town, that compact development, and then what is generally the suburban expansion. In our case, some of that was a little bit of expansion of that in-town neighborhood feel, but also we do have the sort of car-centric neighborhoods there. And then we have a nice green belt around our community, which is wonderful. A lot of people ask, well, why aren't the surrounding communities the green belt? Why aren't we just going out to the edge of Athens-Clarke County and we'll use up all our space? Part of that is that sewer expansion, expensive proposition, but also we can't control what the surrounding counties do. So we are providing that within the community. It is also future development opportunities. We realize that if Athens continues to grow, there's probably some need, if we can continue to build up in a good fashion, to go out into those, but we don't see that need yet in this future land use effort. We rolled into the spring input after the growth concept map. We had an online survey. We did some visual preference surveys, got 700 or so points of feedback from there. We did 8 meetings around town. We had drop-in meetings here in the building. We did 2 more school events. And so we came away with a few ideas out of that. So distributing those folks throughout. So while we're looking at some of these spaces purposefully, we also see that distribution throughout the community. That recent development has been sprawling, and this is probably looking back a few decades at this point. Very reliant on the car as we've grown outwards. How can we make those opportunities for everyone to travel in the ways they want to get around? In terms of neighborhood growth, there's been development that's been good because there's more experiences and amenities and things for people to enjoy. That's hopefully what we see when we talk about 30,000 people potentially here in the next 20 years. We hope those people are all bringing positive things to this. Now, everyone sees people come in and it's a little more traffic. It's a new face around town. You got to get to know them. But hopefully those people all translate into wonderful Athenians and bring a lot of those amenities and experiences. And then redeveloping those corridors and those nodes again. Oh, sorry, go back. Just one final point here on some of the other opportunities. We've been in front of the mayor and commission a few times. We've been to the planning commission a few times. We've had some interest from neighborhoods to go specifically out to them and talk to them directly. Right before this meeting, the 5 Points crowd was able to do that. We did that in a few other locations. We did a very extensive econometric analysis. We hired a firm, Urban 3, that just wrapped up right around the same time that we wrapped up this spring input, which is on the right-hand side here. So they're showing the value based on the land use type and the location in town. So they gave us a whole lot of information about what types of land use are beneficial to the community. And then also what types of land use are essentially getting a subsidy because they're not paying enough in due to that property value. It showed that small things, 5 Points, the 5 Points Business District, crushing it. Downtown, doing a phenomenal job, bringing a lot of value to this community. Prince Avenue, just having 2- and 3-story buildings along Prince Avenue, the numbers just begin to skyrocket. So we've got all of that online. We're putting a few more pieces. They're getting us all their final deliverables for folks to go back and look. Very interesting data analysis and storytellers at Urban 3. They use data to tell the story very well. They used Athens-Clarke County data. If you heard them talk, they talked about a few other things, but all the data they're giving us is Athens-Clarke County specific. So primary source data. And then we're also in the media a little bit with Athens News Matter, articles in Flagpole and Athens Politics Nerd, and then some online story mapping, which led us through the map from the steering committee. And we had a final input here in the spring. We had 10 meetings around town, a little over 100 comments at those meetings. We had an online story map that received some more comments. And then we got out for a few events as well for that. Okay, so getting into the map of the translation, we've got our 9 categories that we currently have in play. The steering committee turned that into 16 categories. So you'll see here, general business in red there. We have some general business still on the map. We have some major corridor on the map, which is along those pathways. We want them to be connected a little bit better. We want some of that vertical or horizontal mixed use to be able to go in there. We want to provide the opportunities for transit where it makes sense. And then we've got 2 nodes. So town center and urban center, those are our two highest nodes that aren't downtown. We've got downtown, urban center, town center, neighborhood center, if you want to kind of step down in intensity. We've got a few other, we had an interesting discussion about our rural network and whether or not all of it is necessarily rural or if there are opportunities for rural residential. We've got quite a few neighborhoods that are in our AR zone, our agricultural residential zone, again, zoning, that really function more like a neighborhood. So they thought there's some opportunity to have some smaller scale rural, but not extend the services there. So if we're talking 1- and 2-acre lots up to maybe 5-acre lots, those don't need sewer. They're going to have water because water is throughout almost all the county. Don't necessarily need the traffic infrastructure and everything that goes along with that. So a little bit of a step down there. One other big one was Main Street business. So that's the smaller scale of the general business. So think in-town neighborhoods, the boulevards, Prince Avenues, 5 Points, the Triangle, the Block, those neighborhoods. Those translate into minor corridor and neighborhood center. Single family residential stays on there. Traditional neighborhood changes names into neighborhood residential. Character, very, very similar. Allowances, very, very similar. Employment to employment, and then the government breakdown into education, government, and parks and open space. So out of all that, we went through this process with the steering committee. This is all of the parcels that were touched by the steering committee. Everything they discussed, everything we talked about to a degree. So breaking up the government was a big one. That's, I think, somewhere between around 12% of our land mass. So just breaking that up into 3 different ones. The rural residential, you can see there in the green. And then a lot of everything else is what we're really going to talk to. So this was 27% that the steering committee touched and suggested things about. A lot of that, like the changing of the government, is kind of a change in name only. They will stay in those same types of uses, education, parks, open space, and government, all will function in a similar capacity. So we wiped that off the map. And we got down to around 13% of our community. Part of this was also some ground truthing. So the rural residential was a ground truthing. We had these neighborhoods already. They aren't 10-acre lots like the rest of our rural area. We had some other parcels that over time have just developed and aren't exactly the way the future land use was. So we wanted to kind of write that map. We call that ground truthing. So from that ground truthing, again, not really any fundamental changes, just sort of some changes on the map, some changes in name. So when we wipe that off, we get down to our 5.56% of the community here, which is what we really want everyone to focus on. These are where there is some change to it. Now, a lot of these are changing fairly similar. That Main Street business to neighborhood node is a very similar change. That Main Street business around a neighborhood node might be a minor corridor, so it has some of those similar allowances. What you will see when I get into it here is that the big change is probably along the corridors. So we did remove quite a bit of general business out of there. And then the steering committee was very intentional about how those nodes in those corridors expanded. So just some of the nodes, we've got the mall out here. That's our one urban center that is proposed. That would be the most intense. There's a little bit of downtown change. You can't see most of downtown because most of it's the same. It eked out a little bit there on the corners. We've got the Alps Beechwood Shopping Center, a big node. The East Side Shopping Center, another big node. We've got Lexington Road, quite a bit of activity going on in Lexington Road area around the Willowwood Shopping Center where the Ollie's and the Goodwill is. Some potential growth around the Walmart Shopping Center. We've got Kroger out at 72 and 29. We've got the General Time up here on on Newton Bridge. Probably an area that maybe a lot of folks aren't familiar unless you're going out to Terrapin or one of the businesses that are out there. But we've got some dying industrial in that area to be able to change that to a new opportunity. And then other than that, we're kind of going along the corridor. So we've got Prince Avenue, we've got Baxter, we've got, 5 Points intersection, we've got the triangle, the block here. And then we've got a little bit of area in and around the chicken plant that has really changed over there in the Boulevard neighborhood. So just a little bit of information. So we talked about all these categories and all those words, very, very small words that are over there on that proposed map. Didn't exactly make enough sense to everyone. So we broke this down into some category descriptors. We've got 6 categories. And so we tried to be very consistent as we go through. So we talk about that character. So the type of anticipated activity there, the use, the types of land uses that will be allowed, the intensity. So that's a combination of building proximity, so tighter setbacks versus looser setbacks, the building height, taller versus shorter, lot coverage, and the activities. Specifically, everyone is quite concerned about height, so we put height on there. The design and form, so whether something is a little more in line with how we build now, or something's a little bit more intentional and mixed use, the difference there. And then something that was really, we thought was interesting to help people understand is this frequency and proximity. So do you need this place for your daily needs, your weekly needs, monthly needs, or something you just sort of get to on an annual basis? So whether or not, those levels would be there as to how intense it would be. And then what kind of customer base does it serve? Is that just serving our local community? Is that serving our entire municipality? Or is that serving more of our region? We are the regional hub for Northeast Georgia. So we're hoping that people understand that those categories are in those two realms there of frequency and proximity. So downtown, I'm going to go through a few maps here. And this is more just to sort of show you where it's at. If we want to get into some specifics about where it is, we can. Not a lot of expansion. We had a little bit of northward expansion. We had a little bit of turning some government zone properties into just downtown. And then we also had a little bit of southwestern expansion there. So not a whole heck of a lot of growth to downtown, but a little bit of growth. This is our most intense designation. In terms of character, we've got historic downtown, we've got shared parking throughout downtown. Very rare that you're able to park, in a parking lot that the business owns that you're going to downtown. Excuse me, there is some of that, but a lot more sharing going on. We've got a lot of mixed use, our highest intensity, up to 10 stories currently. In terms of design, we've got the historic character, we've got shared spaces, we've got buildings pulled up to the street. And this serves a lot of our, this is a regional hub, but it also has some daily features for the folks who live and work around there. We're very happy that, there's some grocery opportunities coming in here we can run over to real quickly. But for the average citizen, it's probably a little bit more of a weekly or maybe even a monthly draw to come downtown and have a bite to eat or meet a friend or go to an event that's done. Just some images here we have of, what our downtown looks like. This was one of our bigger changes. So general business, a good majority of this outside of where you see some nodes. So the general time area and the Kroger at 72 and 29. A lot of the rest of this was general business. So taking this from general business to either general business, which is still red on there, a major corridor, the dark gray on there, urban center, the orange, or a town center, the lighter orange, is to change that characteristic to bring some of that intentionality to those areas to make them connect a little bit better and allow for some of that mixed use, be it vertical or horizontal. So we've got these 4 characteristics and they step down in intensity. So urban is our next biggest node after downtown. Town center gets down to that 5 and kind of 6-story range. Major corridor. So this is the opportunity to build up on our corridors to bring some people and bring more opportunity to it. That would allow for multimodal transit is a big part of that. Reutilize some of that vacancy we have in our commercial areas. And then also we recognize that, everything doesn't need to be in that style. So we do have some general business. It's left on there. The steering committee wanted some left on there. We have places where you would just expect to drive to. You would expect to go, car shopping and mattress shopping. That you're not going to just obviously walk down the street and get to, or I don't know too many people who ride the bus to go buy a mattress, but so that's kind of stepping down there. You see some of the heights that should correspond. You can kind of see the intensity levels. This is probably some of our most intense areas here. So when we're talking about accommodating 30,000 people, we're talking about a big lift in all 4 of these areas. And then we start to break down how they meet. A lot of this is your weekly trips. You're going to the grocery. You're running that errand, you're hitting up the pharmacy, you're going out and grabbing some quick food that night when you've got ball practice and you can't get something cooked. So all those types of intensities there. This is an urban center. So this is a very intense urban center. This is probably a bit more intense than we're ever talking about. But we did talk about that urban center getting up into the 7-8 story range. Again, the only opportunity for that is currently at the mall that is proposed on the map. And everyone sees those maximums, just to be clear, everyone sees those maximums, and that's a little bit concerning. But keep in mind that we hope this builds out incrementally and that obviously everything's not going to get maxed out. This would be like the core of an urban center, and then it disperses as it gets out into the neighborhood. Town center, a little less intense, but you can see the activity. You can see the shared spaces that are going on here. We're talking about a 3-4 story building here. Opportunities for commercial below residential, but also probably commercial adjacent to residential. As we get towards the edge, this is a little bit more of a suburban town center rehabilitation type design. Again, we're up to about 4 stories. I think you can see some commercial along the main areas, but then as you start to step away, maybe the ground floor here is able to be residential. It's not fully mixed use. It's got some of those connections. You've got some on-street parking. You probably got a shared parking facility here as opposed to everyone pulling into their garage. So this is that edge of a corridor, edge of a town center type development. Jumping in down into our next scale of commercial activity and mixed use development, we get into the Main Street business. This translated into minor corridors and neighborhood nodes. So some of the notable ones, we've got a lot of 5 Points being a neighborhood node. Currently, a lot of it zoned Main Street business. As you pull away from 5 Points, it gets a little bit minor corridor, and then it just goes into the neighborhood. We've got the small node that's, coming along at Timothy and Epps Bridge. We had development there of a mixed use development many years ago. There's some opportunity to potentially complement that. Parts of the east side, as you get away from the Kroger Publix shopping center, begins to filter down into the community. So again, we've got that slightly more intense at the center, and then we step as we get towards the community around the east side Walmart, the area around Lowe's, the area that is now currently known as the Shoals, the Lakewood development on Barnett Shoals Drive. As you're driving out there, a lot of you see that as the woods today, but if you guys have heard about some of the developments that have been passed, the opportunity to create a nice node along there, as well as our newest East Side Library, and then some development out along Prince Avenue as we get towards the Loop and Hawthorne, and then also around the chicken plant, which has been growing in a very unique way and some interesting opportunities out there. So again, we're talking lower in intensity here, medium to low intensity in these locations, 1 to 4 stories. almost positive we had that at 3 stories. We will correct that. We will double check all those notes. Minor corridor as well. I think 2 to 3 stories is where we actually ended up at. Apologize for that. Walkability, intentional green spaces, places for people to get together, smaller scale transit, accessibility there. Again, some mixed use, whether that's probably a little bit more horizontal at this scale, but we have, some nice buildings along Prince and in 5 Points that have, even at just 3 stories or 2 stories, have some of that mixed use in the building. We are talking about, pulling buildings a little bit closer to the street, utilizing some of that space. And then again, these are talking a little bit more about our local and weekly trips, possibly municipal stuff. So things you need to go to deal with on a regular basis to keep up your insurance and things like that. So here's a nice look at what's close to a neighborhood center. We probably have a little bit of a pop here in the center. This is probably, larger ceilings here. This is actually probably only functioning as about a 2-story building. But for the most part, you're seeing, 1 and 2 story structures here, places you would walk along and enjoy. You might sit out in front of and enjoy, a coffee or an ice cream or something like that. This is also a boulevard. So we talked a little bit about the right of way. This project does not really get into the right of way. That's a little bit more of what our Transportation Public Works Department's going, but how those two things can correspond, how you can create this nice area around here by doing things like a boulevard. Again, here is Parsons Alley over in Decatur, if you've been there. So we're talking 1 and 2 story buildings. We're talking about community gathering space, roads that can potentially be shut down for an event or a fair or something like that. And then again, just another version of this. This is probably a little bit more of a redevelopment version that's going in. You can kind of see some of the older in-town neighborhood around this, be able to walk to. Now, we would love for this interior to be a little bit nicer. We would be requiring street furniture. We'd be requiring street trees. You can see this development's a little bit newer. They've got the small willow oaks going in there. But as this develops, we would get those things going along with it. And then here's, a little bit more of a fleshed out, more mature version of this. I think this is actually in Baltimore here, walking along where you've got, the first floor shops, and then you've got, apartments and condos above it. So single family residential, stayed single family residential. We heard from a lot of people, please keep the single family residential opportunities. We basically this is just one word. It went, the words didn't even change here. Single family residential, staying single family residential. We're talking low intensity here. These are neighborhoods that are, there's probably a neighborhood open space as opposed to like a community park. Safe, kid friendly, single family detached, house scale, 1 to 2.5 stories, variable setbacks as we range throughout town, and serving our kind of local needs here. Here's your standard looking single family detached products. We would love for them to be even nicer looking than this, but this is, a wonderful opportunity to bring housing and opportunities for people in the community. Traditional neighborhood is that in-town version of this. Now you will see as town expanded a little bit more of this traditional neighborhood over here. This is actually a little bit some of the newer stuff as opposed to the east side, which has a little bit more of the suburban type development. This was mostly in town. Again, this did not change other than in name. So we went from traditional neighborhood to residential neighborhood. Now we see these opportunities as good connections. You can see all the in-town stuff built organically over time, built out largely without a heck of a lot of zoning code actually to it. So there's a little bit more mixing going on there. You see houses turned into offices. You see a duplex next to a house. You see small apartments and townhomes mixed in there. So again, this is one translation to the future one with barely any change on this map to where that is going. Talked a little bit about the features there. We're going to breeze through a few looks here. This is just all the range of housing. So accessory dwelling units, an optional unit in the backyard. You've got the option here of an accessory dwelling unit over a garage. We've got duplexes. We know what the idea of duplexes is, but this is here in Athens-Clarke County. This is a duplex neighborhood on the east side that I think most people would say that shared wall provides a little bit more value and affordability to their unit without taking away from the neighborhood. This is also a duplex. This is a little bit more of an in-town style duplex that you could see, this structure could have been renovated into this, or the structure could be built this way and fit into a community. Triplex, now we're stepping up in intensity here a little bit. We're probably looking at these more along the corridors that abut these neighborhoods. Quadruplex, very same story. So as you slowly go away from those neighborhood business districts and things like that, we would expect the opportunities for, the breakup of a quadruplex. You can see multiple of those along Boulevard. Townhouses, this is becoming a very hot product throughout the country and throughout a lot of the cases we have seen. So a little bit more space, a little bit more affordable option with shared walls. Sometimes you're tucking the parking behind. A lot of times there's on-street parking to go with that. Be able to provide a little bit more of that value, but still at a human scale. So we've got, some townhouses here on the left from another community, and then we've got Ansonboro here. If you've ever been back into Ansonboro, beautiful community that allows people to get right to a restaurant. If they want to, they can easily walk down to Publix and Kroger and do some grocery shopping. They've got some common space, things like that can all go together. A few more images of a townhouse. More townhouses. Yes. Wanted to show you all the options for townhouses. So a bungalow court or a cottage court is usually a nicer, smaller mix. And so we're talking about using space a little bit more efficiently. This is a newer product out in Oklahoma, I believe. I'm sure those are not the cheapest ones on the planet. This is more of what we've kind of seen throughout the Atlanta area. So you've got a central green, and there's about 10 or 12 of these. I think this might actually be in Charlotte. I'm not exactly sure. But we're talking about a little bit smaller unit around a shared space. So everyone doesn't have to take care of their own property. There would be a combined opportunity there. This is perfect for the people who are just getting into it, a small kid running around playing, or people wanting to get out of that big house. So a good opportunity to possibly have single-story living, to have neighbors around that might be able to help you out, give you a cup of sugar every now and again, get you to the mechanic when you need. But also, again, we're talking about using space here a little bit differently because everyone doesn't have their own personal yard and major driveway. A lot of those are shared, and then you're building a little bit. So these are small sort of infill type things that can go in. We're talking, probably usually in the realm of 1.5 to 3 acre lots here. So you put a few lots together right on the edge of a neighborhood and you can build a little bit more of that intensity into there. A couple more views of a cottage court and then bungalow courts. This is the California style, the U shape that's very common out there. This functions a little bit more as an apartment, but usually have a little bit of your own space. So you got that back patio or that front stoop or something like that. So you kind of have that compact living with a little bit of extra breathing room. Mixed density residential, this is our multifamily zone. Again, not much change here on the map. We're just recognizing where that mixed density is. It's in and around. It's that next step away from a lot of those corridors and a lot of those nodes. So we're talking about a little bit more of a medium intensity here. We're talking 2 to 4 stories, shared spaces, opportunities for families still, multifamily arrangements, but also in a lot of these areas, we have single family detached products, possibly single family detached products, with a cottage in the back that you can get a little bit of extra income out of. Your in-laws could move into, your adult child could live in, all those sorts of arrangements that we have going on nowadays. Here's some of our mixed density residential. This is Columbia Brookside over off of Hawthorne. We've got smaller apartments in this size. So this is pretty reminiscent of, style. Oh, this is the Styles building, excuse me. So we've got that right here. So smaller apartment units, ones that fit in a little bit better. A lot of the apartment complexes we see nowadays become these kind of monolithic things. You can't get from one side to the other. So you used to maybe have a neighbor there. Whereas this apartment, you can get around pretty easily. If you wanted to walk from one side of 5 Points to the other, you wouldn't feel like you're going through someone else's personal home. You're kind of going by it, and it's at that scale that you can accommodate. Again, we're talking about that human scale. This is on the high side. 3 stories at the Styles Apartments, probably a little bit on that high side, but most people still feel comfortable, don't feel overwhelmed by that. A little bit larger version of that, kind of in our U-shaped court that we would see a lot back throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s style development. Just again, here is our government being turned into government, education, parks, and open space. We can pop through that. That's all very institutional. Employment center, again, mostly staying the same. Where we saw a little bit of that change is up there on that Newton Bridge corridor, where we're hearing from our economic development team, where we're hearing from developers out there that there's not a lot of viability. They would like to be in the Athena Industrial Park or out along some of the industrial employment job opportunities that are along Atlanta Highway. So again, pretty much leaving the map very similar other than that Newton Bridge location. We've got a lot of job centers here. We've got some medium intensity. You can actually get quite tall in those areas. That is an allowance. Some of these are those campuses that are coming in, those industrial campuses. But also some of those are just a multi-tenant structure like we have out in Coggins Industrial Park there off of Atlanta Highway. Lastly, we get down to rural, going to rural and rural residential. I think I talked a little bit about that, but you can see the little bit of infusions there in the light green throughout the rural. Some of that intensity. So I just want to show you that we zoomed in a little, and I just put these on here so we could probably jump back to them. But we do have the West, and go ahead and breeze through these three real quick. So we can jump back to these as we go into discussion. I just wanted them to be a part of our presentation. And then I think lastly, we have just the full map. So we can get back to this as we have, I believe that's the last slide, Max. Yes. Okay. I've talked for way too long. I will turn this over to you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Planning Commission, we have time to discuss this amongst ourselves now. Just to start us off, provide a little guidance, maybe container for the discussion. Two things that we should be thinking about, any questions or concerns that pop up to us, or if you like, any questions or concerns that you can imagine someone that you know having. Like, I get it. I've been here this whole time. I saw the whole growth concept map and I'm very versed in this, but I think that this is gonna be concerning to someone else. I think this is gonna, like, my neighbor would have something to say about this and I would want to hear the answer to that question. Also, before we leave tonight, we need to figure out, are we ready to vote on this on August 7th? Or do we need to have additional information, additional discussion, or some other opportunity in order to make that vote? So with those questions in mind, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just kick it off by saying, I think something that we hear a lot at the Planning Commission when people propose to do some sort of new thing is people expressing two concerns. New housing is not affordable to they say like, my kids are grown up now and my grandkids and their grandkids, and they had to move to Charlotte or they had to move to Atlanta, and I wish they were closer because housing here has gotten too unaffordable. And yet at the same people will say like, but I oppose this new housing because it's not affordable enough. It's not the right kind of housing. It alters my neighborhood or whatever. And I think it's important to just like the starting point of all of this is that Athens is growing and that growth is inevitable. And some of that is just, I have two kids who are both around 20 years old and probably in the next 10 years, they'll start families of their own, right? So some of it is just Athens is growing because all of us have kids who grew up here and they may have grandkids if we're lucky and so on. So they start new households of their own. Plus, of course, people come here because UGA grows and new companies come in and start new, medical manufacturing facilities or what have you. And the medical school is growing. And so the population's growing and that's inevitable. And that's going to happen whether people or not. And so you either plan for growth, which is what this process is, or you get unplanned growth, which is sometimes what, people complain about. They say like, well, I don't like this thing that got built. I've heard a lot of people saying they don't like what's being built at where the varsity used to be. That's not what they wanted to see there. That's what the zoning allows. And so that, what gets built is what the current future land use map and the current zoning map allows. except to the extent that we change it, which is what this process is. So it's planning for more of the growth that we want to see. And the growth is going to happen regardless, right? So no growth is not on the table. It's either planned growth or relatively unplanned growth, or growth that, you know, is based on a plan that was adopted in the year 2000, which has produced a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't like. So I think that that's, you know, as I think about it, and as I've talked to friends and neighbors about it, it's why do we do this? It's because we're trying to plan for more of the kind of growth that we want to see. Relatively gentle density. I see people sitting here who are friends of mine and who I know have a garage apartment, you know, and in Five Points, in Cobham, in Boulevard, there's hundreds of those, you know, carriage house apartments. I have one myself. And those are great. And more of those allow more people, you know, young single people who are teachers or nurses or whatever, to have a place of their own that's in a nice walkable neighborhood and stuff like that. It doesn't alter the character of the neighborhood because it's very consistent with the character of those old historic neighborhoods. And so I just want to commend the committee for a lot of really hard thinking about this stuff. And I think that what I've seen here and over the course of the last 18 months while y'all have been doing your work on this is a tremendous amount of really thoughtful consideration of the community's needs and how we can accommodate the people that are going to move here in the next 20 years without, you know, having just unplanned growth and unattractive growth. So I commend the committee and with the staff support for what seems like really excellent work to me.
Anyone else got some initial thoughts?
I just agree with everything. I agree with everything that Matt just said. And I really do think Alex and the committee, like, this is serious work and we were really grateful for it. And I heard something today in the meeting prior to this that was so disheartening, where our elected commissioner said he was not going to be approving this land use map because planning staff informed by committees and boards like us have no business making policy. And I totally disagree in the sense that our job and staff's actual job is to make recommendations on policy. I mean, the mayor and commission can decide to not approve it, but that's kind of the job of all these citizen boards and committees and planning staff. And, you know, I think we've, on this body over the last, you know, I've been on this body now for 7 years, and I think the last couple of years have been, in a lot of ways, the most challenging, that we have elected officials who just openly say that what we say doesn't matter. And I guess I bring that up because, like, even the commissioner who said that, and all of the people who were here in the meeting prior to this, didn't stay to listen to what we just listened to for an hour and a half. And I think if a lot of them had listened to that, they'd feel better about the process, they'd understand better. I think there was some problem with how the time of that meeting earlier was posted, because a lot of people showed up at 5:15 and didn't hear Mark go into the process, how many years. This is actually something you all started in 2023, but this kind of started when I started in the planning commission, and Kristen, you and I started at the same time. We went right into, it was like sort of trial by fire. We went right into the comp plan. And basically this process was seen as, if I understand it correctly, Bruce, this process was seen as so important and so worthy of its own effort that the can was kind of kicked down the road, because that was the time when, like, the Envision Athens was happening, then just more stuff happened. The pandemic, there's a lot of reasons why this process, the actual real focus part of this process, got put to 2023. But in a lot of ways, it was being talked about and thought about for as long as I've been on the commission. And the number of times where, especially in like the industrial area on the east side, where we really need this guidance to be able to make the decisions we make. Like the number of times where we're like, this property is not, I understand why it was zoned this way in 1999. The zoning doesn't make sense with how it was actually used or the economic situation or whatever. We need this document. It's so important. And I feel like in a lot of ways, for me, I've been just waiting and watching and hoping we could get to this point. And I'm really, I have a lot of questions, but I think you guys did a really good job. I think splitting these land use categories made a lot of sense. And I think, just to echo what Matt was saying about planning, growth is absolutely inevitable. And if we, especially when you're talking about housing, people are still going to want to come here no matter what. So you don't make enough housing, you don't have enough housing supply. And then the only people who live here are the people who can afford to live here. Like, is that what we want? Do we only want a community of people who can pay $1.5 million for their house? I don't want that as the only people who live in the community I live in. So we have to plan for this growth. We have to accept a little bit more density. And what this map does a really good job of is, and what Mark did a really good job of communicating was, we want to plan where that density is appropriate. Like, and make sure we're protecting the areas where it's not appropriate. And sort of asking in some ways the entire community though to absorb some of this growth in a way that makes sense. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, because I think there's probably other people who have more general comments. I do have a lot of like little, just like, what's this, what's that sort of questions, but I'll stop now so you guys can make more general comments if you want to.
I don't have a ton of questions. I'm incredibly appreciative of this process and the committee that you've steered and all of the work and effort you put into this. And really, just to piggyback on what you have both said so eloquently already, this is why I want to live in Athens. I like being part of a community that is this intentional and this outreaching with our citizens to get this input and to have this be something that we've deliberated on as a community for 18 plus months intensely, and certainly longer than that. And so in my work, every facet of it, these additional categories help guide real estate. They help guide decision. They help guide development more thoughtfully. And I'm just really appreciative of the collaboration of this effort. So thank you.
So, yes, to echo everything that's been said, yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I wanted to applaud the different rural and open space categories. That was something like when Urban 3 came, I had a question about like, well, what if you built something near a park and we never really had a way, it was just government and it was impossible to tell what was actually there. So this is really helpful just looking at all these colors. I'm curious, like I do like drilling down more into the different levels of intensity. Maybe, and I'm not sure who's the best person to answer this one, but I'm curious, like when we're posed with something in a neighborhood residential versus a single family residential versus maybe even mixed density residential, like what would be the degrees? I'm thinking like when we see these, like a proposal come that requires the future land use change, what would necessitate? I mean, I'm thinking like maybe there's something that is neighborhood residential and the proposal would bring it to single family residential. Like what would be that difference? Are we setting ourselves up for like a lot of little tiny changes like that kind of thing?
Let me take a swing, and then Alex or Mark, or Stephen, there is in your handout that multicolored summary. He's got it out right here. Nope. That one. And that I think helps answer the kind of question you're reaching for.
Okay.
That we can create additional bandwidth of land use. And with residential, they do speak to different types of intensity, height, number of units, but then they also speak a little bit to the context and where they're located. We're not talking about plunking down that kind of density in the middle of an existing subdivision necessarily. What we're talking about is focusing on corridors, looking at intersections that already have high traffic and they already have infrastructure. So when somebody would come in and let's say they come into our office and talk to staff and say, well, look, I'm interested in this property. This future land use category is half the density that I need it to be. I would need to change that future land use category to be able to proceed with this project. We have a very frank discussion with them about why those categories were assigned. It's usually very empirical stuff. There is insufficient sewer, for example, or the type of build that you're going to do generates far more traffic that can be handled on that local street in which this property is located. Or it's out on the edge of town in a place that couldn't support that because you don't have water and you don't have sewer. And you have rural section roads. It doesn't work. So when you look at that comparative image, maybe it answers your question, but we want that to be a guide stone. There is some overlap though, right? So you will see one category may have 2 to 3 stories, and then the next one may have 2 to 4, and then this one may have, up to 5. And there's, Mark touched on that. We need the flexibility to build up into those nodal areas. And when we say node, we're talking about intersections. Sometimes that's one of those planner speak things that we throw around like everybody understands what a node is. A node is an area where things can concentrate. A node is an area where density can happen and it doesn't do it. It's not a problem. It can handle it. So those things build to allow for more intensity in the centers of those nodes, and then they step down as they transition out onto a corridor, and certainly as they transition into a neighborhood. That help?
It does. And as I was asking the question, I was like thinking that what you were saying might have been where that was going to go, but I wasn't sure. Because I do feel like right now there's a bit of like sometimes we'll see things and we'll be like, I don't know, maybe. I feel like this gives us a lot more context clues than what we currently have.
Try to flesh it out a little bit. Yeah. And we've already got developers coming in. They're like, this is really helpful. This makes sense to me. Is this something I could ask for? And right now the answer is, well, no, it's not a policy yet, but thank you for enjoying, but the reason why they're responding well to it is because it is a little more prescriptive. It does reach into some other things that are more than just a character-based narrative statement. We try to have some images to show, well, this is what we're talking about. Here's an example of what it is. So we want more of those images to be part of the discussion to help demystify a bunch of long words on a sheet of paper.
And does this also, like, for example, when we've seen a couple cottage court proposals, and they always come with like a string of variances because they're not really, I know that's getting into zoning and this is not zoning.
That's right.
But does this start to lay the groundwork for those types of wiggle room things?
It absolutely does, because and I think the comment was made, it locates where these things would be appropriate. Right now, we wrestle with the appropriateness discussion. What we want this policy document, this map to do is to say the community's looked at this and it's appropriate to do that kind of style of build here. And then the zoning code will dictate the how. What materials are we talking about? What's the parking ratio? Are we going to change that? What is the height that we're going to talk about? Not a range. What is it going to be? And we can be way more prescriptive in the ordinance, in the zoning ordinance. Future land use map is not an ordinance. Future land use map is not law, but it does help translate community values into law. And so that's what we want to use it for.
I had a similar question around that, but I think I can see the difference between your general business and your employment center. Because I was gonna ask, was this developed with the anticipation of business growth, or are we just designating space and with the anticipation of business growth, and where is she located?
A little bit of both. I mean, it does anticipate there will be growth, but the honest answer is there are, in those employment, the big purple on the map,
Mhm.
a lot of that, as Mark showed, is actually contracting because we have a bunch of that that isn't built out yet. So we still have opportunity on the map in that sector, in the employment. General business, what we're anticipating, that sort of, call it highway business, some folks, Atlanta highway, or further out, 441. That general business category can be expanded to pick up like research and development, where once upon a time that was seen as light industry only. Well, these days, research and development is smaller scale. It can be in a 5,000 square foot building and do exactly what it needs in that amount of space. Why can't that exist on a corridor in a general business category? So the nature of doing business, the nature of developing has shifted in the 25 years since we did a big change. And what we're trying to do is reflect that change in these categories.
Can I make just a quick comment? What Kristen had said. The readability of this was important to me, and every meeting that the committee had, I would have a meeting days before that with staff, looking at what was put back together from our last meeting. And I love color. I like to be able to find information quickly. And I assume everyone else does. My hell is having to get out of a room and nothing but black and white words to tell me how to do it, little bitty things. So some people love that. I think developers or anyone that's interested that wants to see needs to, it all leads you to this. You start here, you go to this, and then you go to the big definitions. And we had that conversation even just the other day about how to do that. But the coloring and the way one leads to another, I think is important. It's not just the map itself. It's not just the words that define the map. It's how somebody's going to come through and understand. To answer a question like you were beginning to figure it out. And so I thought that was important, and the committee obviously did as well. Simplicity sometimes is important. People, the quicker they can find the right answer, better. We don't need to lead them into a direction that gets them frustrated, or they just start assuming the wrong thing.
It was really cool to work with a group of people like the steering committee that pushed us to make sense. Their expectation was make sense. And we did have a conversation, and we watched their conversation where they were really wrestling with how to arrive at something that makes sense. And in public discourse, this is my plug for the work of the group and being able to sit and watch y'all work and how the leadership of it. It was so focused on the end result. It wasn't about anybody's agenda. It wasn't really about anybody's individual experience, although they brought those to the discussion. And the field work they did was commendable as well, going to places they'd never been to before, stretching their familiarity with Athens. I think it shows in the end result that came out of y'all's work. You guys were saying things, we look at maps every day, all day, and you were saying things we hadn't thought about. So that's when you know a group of residents, a group of citizens have got it. They're into it and they're thinking about it the right way. And definitely the last 6 months of this process where the creative juices were flowing, that's where you guys were.
I appreciate that. And as I drive through Athens, I see it in color now. I'm in the gray road. I'm in a yellow neighborhood. That's how it goes.
I just wanted, since we're talking about colors, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm sure there's an online version of this where I can zoom in and actually, because I feel like I know Athens and I look at this map and I'm like, wait, where is that road again? But there are a couple, and maybe only because it's red and so it pops out at me, but like there's a couple spaces where I see red next to residential. And that to me is always even on the current map is a bit of a red flag. And so I was just like, I feel like there's some instances where it's correcting what's on the ground right? Like it might be, like I'm looking up, maybe this is 441 or no, that's North Avenue. Where there's some like, there's some commercial, like past JJ Harris, I think that is. And then on the east side, like, there's just like little pockets of these red.
I think there's one like kind of across Lexington from the airport. Is that what you're talking about? I think those, my understanding is that those are shifting to be what's actually there.
They're existing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Didn't we get to our point last week about Hawthorne?
exactly. Yeah. And so, and it's really hard to tell on this printout, but it was the same kind of thing where I'm looking at like the gray down Hawthorne. And it does seem to kind of butt in to that neighborhood more than just being along the corridor.
So when you read the description of minor corridor in particular, I think it's important to point out the fact that we're promoting, the committee wrestled with this about minor corridors, major corridors, how to interact with neighborhoods, how to be a good neighbor if you're commercial. And the notion of mixed use not just being high, but mixed use being horizontal, so that you can have commercial up on Hawthorne and have it step down into townhomes as you approach a Hawthorne extension. That's the description of minor corridor. So it gives that bandwidth of not pure highway business. It allows for contextually appropriate growth on those corridors. And then the zoning would actually break it up.
I hear you and I don't disagree with you. But when you have a neighborhood like Hawthorne Extension, as an example, where, I mean, right now the zoning is completely messed up, but even with what you're talking about, this idea that we have existing houses there and they could be replaced with something stepped down with like a smaller apartment building, which again, like, okay, fine, but then we just had a meeting of people that were so upset at the idea of having like a duplex in their neighborhood. So why does that neighborhood get preference over something along Hawthorne that was clearly in this zone 20 years ago to begin with?
So bunch of things in what you're saying. Fixing the map is exactly what we're trying to do. So let me focus on that.
Sure.
So this change and the wording that goes with that category, and this might be one of those where the summary is not doing justice. You may want to use all the words in the handout, minor corridor.
Okay.
But the point here is to create something that can coexist with in-town neighborhoods.
I get that.
Okay.
He said that, say, I mean, I'm saying like, okay, bad example because it wouldn't be appropriate, but Pinecrest, for example, should also be a minor corridor. And we can say, well, it can still coexist with the neighborhood. I just feel like the pushback we get from that would be different.
Okay, so Hawthorne not being a local street like Pinecrest.
Hawthorne Extension, I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about one block in, I'm not talking about Hawthorne. Hawthorne, yes,
Yes.
that needs some redevelopment.
So
Yes.
future land use is not zoning, so it's worth saying again. The zoning that would go along with this, that would translate that future land use category, would not put commercial on Hawthorne Extension. In this exercise and what we're planning to do, we would not be putting CG zoning at the risk of getting into a zoning discussion on Hawthorne Extension. This sets the table for us to have a policy to change that. And not just on Hawthorne, but in other places where it exists. We can walk some of those things back and make it appropriate. And that's what we intend to do. Following adoption of this gives a policy document for then us to take an implementation step and bring forward rezones that align with the future land use maps. Does that help?
I mean, yes, I get what you're saying, but it's one of those like, well, why would that one block in from Hawthorne Avenue, where we're talking about Hawthorne Extension, that could be neighborhood residential and still capture a lot of the same zoning compatibility as minor corridor, but it keeps minor corridor from bleeding over into an established neighborhood.
Okay. Those are all one parcel. Maybe this helps answer the question. So where something goes, it's a through block parcel. We didn't have, I won't say there's none, but we didn't have many examples at all where the future land use was broken on the parcel.
No, I know what you're saying, and I think this is just a case where I need to zoom in, it's so tiny, and I don't wanna like take up a lot of time on like this one tiny thing, but I think this is a case where I would like to zoom in, cause I think I would like to see something.
For the purposes of this discussion, that slider tool that we sent out earlier in the year, that link still works. We will resend it to y'all in case that's lost. But it would allow you to get all the way down, you know, you can zoom all the way in and slide that thing back and forth and see current versus proposed and have aerials. And that's available to the public as well, so.
And it is, let me just address that real quickly. And from what I'm seeing and what I remember, you kind of hit it just right. The minor corridor is the lot that touches the road. And if it goes all the way through to Hawthorne Extension, it's going to catch that.
Of course.
But I'm looking with, barely can see it, but it appears that there are several on Hawthorne Extension only that don't pass all the way through to Hawthorne that are mixed use and or
I just need to.
yeah, mixed density rather.
Yeah.
So you have to zoom in. It's Athens, Georgia. It's tiny. Yeah, I do that when I read a magazine. I'm still doing that. You have to zoom in on this map.
Can we actually go back to that east side, Gainesville, Lexington? Because we moved on from that general business. We were saying it's ground truthing, but the fact that it's on that red general business there is on this map indicates to me that it's not ground truthing, right? Because this is the fully stepped down, which means that anything in here is a significant enough change, right? Do we know why that general business is in there now? Why are we changing the future land use to general business?
It's there today. It's general business today.
This is,
It got changed and then it got changed back because the airport overlay. The airport overlay goes right through those properties and limits a lot of opportunities for development.
Sarah, this is one of those things where we're trying to be as transparent as possible. The steering committee did have discussion about that, and as Mark said, it went to corridor, and then the steering committee's discussion brought it back to the red.
okay,
And so we've left it because there was a touch on it that changed it during the
Okay.
course of, we left it on the map. But that, you know, you can barely see it in the lot lines on there, but the airport is right there.
oh, yeah, yeah.
And so there are some restrictions on, there are some restrictions on what can happen in those airport overlays.
Yeah.
So that was the discussion on that.
Okay. Great, that was just a point of confusion.
Sure.
Talk about ground truthing, and then I see it on that map and I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, so I got you.
I have a couple questions that you.
Yeah, it is.
Well, one of them, I just, on the growth concept map, the special district, what was that?
Hmm.
Forgot, but I think you guys told us that.
Well, we had a couple on the map.
Okay,
And so one of the special districts, we put those on there because they deserved some special discussion. What are we going to do with these areas was essentially the question that those blue blobs represented. One of the blue areas that was a special district was the property that was going to be the amphitheater off of 441.
oh, yeah,
You know, it has sat fallow since that project kind of fell apart. But that's a linchpin piece for the potential of providing sewer service into that basin. So we left that on there as a discussion topic for the community, for planning commission, for the steering committee, but also for our county commission. To say this is something we need to put a focus on in our public policy discussions. What's our directive on that? The other one was right across the river from the entertainment district of downtown, the new arena. We wanted to, again, put focus on that discussion. If downtown's going to grow and have intensity as is proposed with the Classic Center and the anticipated things that would come next to the arena, we need to be thinking very clearly about what pressures that will or will not create on the neighborhood immediately across the river. So that's what this is intended to do, is let's have a very frank policy discussion in our community about where we see things going. And that's why those blue, I think those are the two big blue ones.
So there's sort of a placeholder for later focused policy discussion.
Exactly. It's not,
Yeah, it's not a, it
Those
doesn't
things didn't-
coincide with the future land use map.
they didn't
designation
turn into
necessarily.
something on this future land use map as worked on by the committee. But we still think they're important enough that they could turn into recommendations down the line. And they are issues in the now that we want to make sure are part of that public community discussion.
Okay. Great. And so within those two areas, did you all do much with the future land use designation for those parcels, or like, did those get treatment?
So the image that's on the screen right now, the area across the river, no change. So future land use for that, I believe, is still in a residential flavor that's currently on the future land use map. That did not change.
Okay,
And that did come up in our discussion to not just.
leave it alone for now.
There were people like, no, we're not taking downtown across the river.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't intend to, but that was a pretty good stronghold.
It just needs sort of a later, more focused discussion on this.
On that.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
conversely, you can see what I believe is town center shown on the amphitheater site, which is almost right in the middle of the screen. I don't have a pointer or anything.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I do. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So, whereas across the river from downtown, hands off. This was, okay, we have a site that has been prepped for development that is not getting development, hands on. Let's open the doors for something in this policy document that says, this is okay. This is a spot where we would like to see something happen. So that's why that's on the map.
Okay, that's great. And then another question I had, got a couple more. One of them is the new residential rural future land use designation. So just looking at the zoning compatibility, I'm wondering about, and I know we're not talking about zoning, but the smallest parcel residential that's currently allowed or that's proposed to be allowed is the RS-40. So that's about an acre lot minimum. But then we see a lot of the light green, which are much more small lot development than 40,000 feet.
Not too many. But I thought where you're going with this is there are some of those that got the light green that are 2 acre or 3 acre lots. Would that mean that if they became RS-40, they could be subdivided further?
That's a good question.
That's where I thought you were.
Yeah,
What we don't have is a tool in the toolbox in the zoning code yet, and we may not have one that does something that is a 5 acre lot minimum. But that was a part of the committee's discussion was, okay, so let's talk about this rural residential. How does it work? What would it be like if it had a zoning category? And I think we spent, 45 minutes or so one day just talking about that. So to your point, the way it's represented on the map right now, the steering committee's comfort level sort of stopped at, let's reflect something that is already built.
currently on the ground. Yeah.
You're not going to see a large tract of rural that has rural residential on it that isn't already subdivided. It's only going to be on areas that are already subdivided. And frankly,
Well,
those subdivisions have been around since the 70s and 80s, most of them.
yeah, and I guess where I wondered about that is like, for example, on the west side of the county, what is that right there?
Let's see if we can pull it up.
There's sort of a diamond shaped light green with the blue in the middle of it.
It's the middle school.
And so what's the area around the middle school? So that's zone,
So that has a PD that was adopted
oh, okay,
for a subdivision.
okay,
That is a little, frankly, a little less than an acre lot subdivision.
okay.
And it
But
was-
because they haven't done it and subdivided, we just have to show it as the one big. parcel.
Correct, but it
Okay.
is on the books as a PD.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I think that answered that question. And so the couple of other places where I see that, that's probably what's going on. Like there's one out, I guess that's out Newton Bridge Road. Is that Newton Bridge Road? No.
Like green.
Yeah, I guess,
41.
is that what's going on there? Kind of,
Oh, no, that's North Island. That's Sandy, that's the park. That's Sandy Creek Park up at the little circle with.
You're off to the right. of that.
yeah, the
That
more
already
target.
exists.
Yeah,
So
That's
that's
the
another
same
thing,
thing.
ground truthing.
Okay.
We already have lots out there that are less than 10-acre lots.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
so they've just been, okay, that makes sense. And then, and none of the sort of zoning compatibilities include, like, there's a conservation subdivision ordinance, just its own separate thing that just doesn't come into this at all yet. Like, if somebody wanted to do a conservation subdivision.
That wouldn't be on future land use. That wouldn't change the
Zoning.
future land use, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had, really all over the place. So can we build 10 stories downtown now? Okay,
But we have.
Going any higher, that it becomes a problem. That
yeah,
happens.
so the whole, like the river, whatever that one was called, that's 10 stories, is the mark 10 stories?
Yeah, Hyatt.
None of them are 10 stories. You don't, if you go above 8, you have to change
Is that
to,
whole fire?
well, it's concrete and steel as opposed to like sticks over a podium. And so it's vastly more expensive to build.
Yeah.
So what you see though, where we do have 10 stories is you have, the way we calculate height, it's an average. And so where we have grade change, it's able to accomplish a story below grade, still counts as a story. So the way our zoning is set up, now this, again, this is not future land use.
Yeah.
Future land use was really, what we were trying to say with downtown is the future of downtown outside of our historic districts, there is a desire, there's an interest to have more than 100 feet tall. And the future land use category was trying to anticipate that by saying that could be possible. From a zoning standpoint, y'all have been in on those discussions, the River Mill discussion, I think is the best case of the things we've got to work through with our fire marshal and the things we have to work through with the building code to do building differently to be able to get to that height.
Yeah.
But that's,
Kind of a
again,
whole
kind of
separate
outside, yep.
Yeah, okay. And then. Kind of back to residential, I live in the Five Points area and kind of thinking about what I hear people express about their concerns when it comes to housing typologies. And I think there's a lot of different kind of incompatible feelings that are expressed by people who live in Five Points. And one of them is there's a lot of folks who don't want to have their street designated as a historic district. And the streets that some people that are not currently in historic districts, but have some historic structures on them. There's just been a lot of resistance over the years to those streets becoming historic districts. That just is what it is. But one of the concerns that I have heard from time to time, if we're kind of moving to where there's already a ton of missing middle housing in Five Points. We know this. We've done missing middle housing tours. We know that there's garage apartments and ADUs and all sorts of things, or quadplexes that you can't tell that it's a quadplex unless you count the water meters. We have a lot of that. And while I think there's some fear around that, I often find that when you point out to somebody that they live next to it and didn't realize it, they can soften a little bit, realize like, oh, that's actually not that offensive. But I do see some fear coming into play when it comes to people being worried about this beautiful historic house, not technically historic, but historic because it's older, now is going to be a place where somebody could come in and build maybe same scale, but build a duplex or something a little bit more dense. And they're going to be, I think, concerned that they're going to lose these structures. I personally think that for the most part, the economic forces are going to make that like prohibitively expensive. But I think as we've all seen in that neighborhood, there's some people with like dumb money who will come in and demolish a house they bought for $1 million. So I guess what I'm getting at is how I can see the sort of wave coming where people come and they're concerned about that. And what kind of conversations did you all have in the committee about that issue? Where you sort of have this desire to protect structures from being turned into something more, where there's more units on one lot, but yet no desire to actually historically protect it. So kind of this.
So, and you're talking to a former chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. So I don't ever let that just fly out without some conversation in it. And while we didn't officially speak about historic preservation, because it is not in the purview of this map, it is important. And so what this again, and Bruce will correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there's still the zoning catch, first of all. And then secondly, this map doesn't really touch those 5 Points neighborhoods. It's left it as the same as it was. But as far as preservation goes, it doesn't have to be designated in a local historic district to be historic. The house is historic whether this person says it is or isn't. That's my view on it. And so what people need to understand as well, I'm going to be a little bit out of the lane here, I apologize, but if I buy a house on a historic road and I look out at this beautiful 100-year-old house that's historic, I don't want it torn down because, as I say, that's the ocean I bought a house on, in a sense. Instead, it's not an ocean, but it is a historic district. Without it being in a historic district, that can all change just based on I don't like the house. So that's more reason why it actually is smart to have your neighborhood or your street designated as a local historic district for the protections of what you bought. Again, outside of what we worked with. But to go back to what you were saying, we really didn't touch. We didn't touch those neighborhoods into a different, didn't categorize them differently. They might have a new name, but it has the same restrictions. But the zoning is going to catch anything else like that. And we did stay away, if I can just take one more of it, the word duplex, that's like, we're not throwing that word all around. That is a quick way to start tearing up this map. So you hear duplex and you think the duplexes we don't like that tend to be ugly and ill kept. But so again, still falls back into zoning more on that. I don't know if that exactly got to it, but the person perhaps in the neighborhood is still going to experience what was there. And we're not, this map is not going to say, I'm just picking a road out of nowhere. University Drive, now we can jam, duplexes and triplexes in there. That's not touched.
Right.
Yeah, I had him pull it up. The parts where there is any change to the future land use in 5 Points.
All commercial.
Related to the business district.
Yes. And I will add that from what I can tell, the future land use designation that has been put here as a neighborhood center, the zoning the range of zoning compatibilities that are currently imagined for the neighborhood center, I'm pretty sure that nothing inside of that neighborhood center is not currently zoned compatibly. It's already commercial neighborhood or RM1, RM2, commercial office. There's nothing about changing the future land use here that necessitates some kind of change to the zoning.
It might be what I'm talking about is really, it's gonna come into play more zoning later.
Yeah.
I think I'm just getting ahead of myself and you all listen to me talk for long enough that you know that I'm a fan of house scale multifamily. And I think it's a great way to get people getting to enjoy the neighborhood I get to enjoy. And having a more kind of walkable lifestyle, or at least a car light lifestyle. But yeah, I'm just getting ahead of myself and trying to think about what people will say later, but it will be much later.
Yeah.
So I'll just let it for now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that a lot of, I think that it's been said several times, and it will need to be said many more times, that the future land use is not zoning. And just to reiterate that with another related piece of information, any zoning changes that would come would also go through these processes where there are public meetings, multiple public meetings, probably town halls. It'll go to the planning commission. It'll go to the mayor and commission. Nothing, so I think that maybe some people might be afraid that like, oh, well, you say it's not zoning, but you're just gonna go in and change the zoning in your office, and you're not gonna tell us about it. Like you'll do this future land use map change, and then you'll do the zoning changes where I can't hear about it, and this is my only chance to say something about the zoning. It's not zoning. I think that's important. I think now would be a good time to transition to our public input, and we can come back for a wrap up, roundup afterwards. Kind of come to a consensus about, do we need another meeting for this? So for members of the public who are still here and wish to speak, thank you for your patience. Just a reminder, you will have 3 minutes to speak. You'll have a beautiful traffic light there to let you know. When it goes to red, I will ask you.
Throw me out.
Yes, I've got a big cane. I will politely let you know that your time is up. When you come up, state your name. And thank you so much for being here to contribute.
Go ahead. Rita Kelly, 5 Point resident. We came to the wonderful meeting that they held at 5 o'clock. I wanted to talk about Pinecrest, which you brought up as an example. Very disappointed in the 6-1 decision to recommend. R2 is much more dense than R1. And I think if you really saw the neighborhood, you'd understand we've got so much traffic. Students drive everywhere. I don't know if you live near students, but I do already. Students drive everywhere. They have cars. They have much better cars than I own. So to think that they don't is wrong. There's going to be a lot more cars. He went from like 9 bedrooms allowed under R1 to 21. Also, the setback is different. It's very disappointing for us in Five Forks because we walk that area and we like it the way it is. The guy has never taken care of those 2 houses anyway that he owns, but we like the grass. We like it the way it is. There are going to be a lot more cars, parking issues. I feel like a lot of times maybe you're kowtowing to developers. The developers, he's not going to do middle income or anything. I've heard from good sources, they're 1.2 million going for those townhomes. So it's going to be a rich alumni or rich parents of students. This is no way making it more diverse or other people can move in. It's going to be more rich people, if that's what you all want. We have very narrow streets. So when you think about corridors or perhaps even the land use map for the 5 Points node, where are you going to get these boulevards or things to make with trees and street? I mean, they're so narrow already. 5 Points intersection with Millage and Lumpkin is just known for traffic, accidents, traffic, pedestrian issues. I don't know how you can get more dense in our area. I just think you need to think about some of those things when you're passing that. So thank you. We appreciate these meetings, but it's changing 5 Points too much. That's why we moved to 5 Points.
Thank you.
I have a question about it. It's always, it's about color. It's about the varsity property, and it's particularly about 5 Points. I'm on Millage Terrace.
What's your name, man?
I'm sorry, I'm Julie Knowlton.
Yeah, and great start. If you have, just for all of our sakes, I think that ask your questions. The questions are appreciated. And I think that we wait till the end of public input to address the questions as a body. So,
I'll be writing them down.
yes.
Well, I was just gonna ask that before you approve the map, is that you do pay very careful attention to what Mark and Bruce have labeled the transition area from the minor corridor, or the neighborhood center in 5 Points. I have too poor of eyes to be able to tell for sure, but it didn't look like it was only Lumpkin that was pink. It looks like it does, for example, in my case, include the block where the properties might face Lumpkin, but like right across the street from me, a developer owns a lot that goes from Lumpkin through to Village Terrace. So it looks like, based on the future land use plan, which takes effect as early as 28, did you say?
It depends when the mayor and commission, should they adopt this, they'll set the start.
I mean, all I'm saying is that's pretty quick when you think about the lifetime of a neighborhood, or, you know, you bought a house and you did pay a lot or not. If you, it's like the ocean, like you say, you expected that to be residential, but all of a sudden it might be really difficult for you approving a zoning change. We say, the developer says, well, it's on your land use map. That's what I went by. I should be able to build my 4-story business, 3-story, whatever it is, my business on that lot. And I just think it's the transition, Rutherford, that we discussed earlier, where they put on a street that borders a school. It's historically always been residential, single family, small, modest homes, affordable. And a developer, I don't know if he had to ask for anything, but he built 2, student housing, eyesores. And it just seems like I'm just saying, it is getting into just preferences. But I just would like y'all to be very, very careful about exactly where that color goes, because I have no problem with any of the color blocks until you look at the detail of the bleed. And when you say transitional, that sounds good. But in reality, nobody wants a developer to come in and do what they did on Rutherford, except the developer. And nobody wants on Village Terrace. I can promise you 100% of the residents there would say, no, we don't want commercial to be on our street. But it looks like it's the color that you're saying, well, sure, that would be fine. That's just natural transition, where we would say bleed. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
Hi, Amy Kassane, 526 Highland Avenue, and just really glad that I came tonight and saw all the work that had been done and a lot of really interesting things. I hope the presentation will be available online somewhere. But I guess I just really want to ask, I wanted to ask a question. I know that affordable housing is a major goal and major concern for our community. And I also understand that increasing density is one of the primary tools that we were talking about to address that affordable housing. But I was wondering, it's not mentioned in the guiding principles, and I just was curious if that had been a discussion. And I guess I like some of the ideas that were thrown out about how to add density in different places in the 6%, I guess, that it's going to be focused in. But I was just wanted to throw out, I mean, is it possible that if
affordable housing was part of a guiding principle, that it would encourage developers to be more creative in how to do that. And in the, maybe even in the green belt in those areas. So, so yeah, I'm just throwing that out. And my other question is just something is why are we so, why do we always want to have the setbacks, not have setbacks in certain areas? Like I see like I just don't always understand it. I see these multifamily apartments in the middle of nowhere built up against the road or on a major corridor. Why wouldn't you want a setback? Which I think I saw in the characterizations of the categories, that the setback in the major corridor was near or close to the street. And I'm just curious about, I know I get new urbanism, but I don't think every place should have new urbanist principles. So that's my other question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ken Portier. I live in 160 Spruce Valley Road in Cedar Creek, livable, bikeable neighborhood. I have really no issue with the map, but the map is useless without the legend, and the legend titles are useless without description. And as Mark pointed out, the current descriptions are a little hard to work through. Hence, he did this, what do you call, descriptive index. And I would ask that the powers that be, and maybe the steering committee, go back and actually think more carefully about these descriptions. While this document is a policy document, it's also a vision document. And I was thinking of this descriptive index. I mean, you basically say character, but really that's the 2025 character. And part of our vision is the 2045 character that you envision. And it's very unclear right now. And I'll make a quick point. The difference between a minor corridor and a neighborhood center. If you look at the description, you kind of scratch your head, like, what is the real difference? And I think the real difference there is a vision for what this area is going to look like. A minor corridor is going to still have a road through it, and it's an important road. Whereas a neighborhood center, the road is secondary. It's the community you're trying to build in that center, the walkability, the public transit. So somehow that vision has to come across in this document. And I think it will definitely help developers, because then they'll be able to say, does my vision match this area's vision? If it doesn't, then they got to go talk to the planning department. But if it does, they may be encouraged to keep going. And then finally, two things. One, I think roads are land use. And really, I think, as somebody mentioned, you really need to think about roads as part of this landscape. Especially comes up in the corridors, major corridors, minor corridors, but also in the town centers. It's nice to visualize a town center, but getting from where we are right now to that vision is going to involve roads and traffic lights and sidewalks. And the other one is, I would argue that growth is inevitable is an assumption. It's not a statement. Change is inevitable. We know that things are going to change, and this is a change document. Growth is one of the factors that impact change. But if you look at, I'm a statistician, I look at demographic statistics all the time. If you look at the demographics right now, growth is iffy, right? Populations are flattening out. People aren't moving as much as they were 20 years ago. So growth may or may not happen in Athens-Clarke County, but change is going to happen. And this document helps us think about change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Hillary Weston, and I live at Village Terrace. And I do want to say thank you for letting us speak in the public, and thank you for the folks that put together this land use plan. And I know it was a lot of work, and I do think it's important to guide the growth. I also have noticed recently that the Planning Commission has thought about concentrating student growth in the area of downtown and utilize that to leverage dollars that can build affordable housing. And I hope that one of the things that the planning staff does is look at groups like the university to partner, or the hospitals or the schools, with communities to build bungalow courts and cottage courts that will be made to be affordable to teachers and nurses and people that live in the community. And through that, maybe a tool would be a zoning overlay. And within that, so I'm not going to refer to my notes, but I think that, for instance, in that area, that transitional area, I don't think it's as transitional as you think. I know a lot of people that live there. Our school counselor lives there. A librarian lives there. The Kellys live there. There's a lot of people when you walk up and down that street, as I do every day, that are not students. That isn't a student transitional area. People are living in duplexes and cottages and really happy living there. They're afraid that the Pinecrest rezone is going to increase taxes, increase density, and also increase the hunger for developers to go in and really change that neighborhood. And so it scares us to hear transitional, like it's going to transition to something where missing middle folks are living now happily. So I just think that that's true. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is setbacks, because I also agree with what Amy was saying. If you look in that neighborhood, the setbacks are 30 feet. And I think that it's important not to assume that that's the future, to get rid of those setbacks. That I think setbacks create nature and safety, and they're there, if you can afford them, for good reasons, for privacy as well as, but just beauty and safety for kids who might run out, or cats and dogs. And so that would be another thing that an overlay could look at, a historical characteristic of a neighborhood and say, well, in this area, RM1 would have the higher setbacks. And cottage courts would be the sort of variable there that you could increase density further back, but maintain the feeling of that neighborhood. So just some kind of random thoughts there. I think you could do some surveys and you would find that the majority of people would want those setbacks to be higher. Certainly that's all of the folks coming out about East Rutherford. And they're sort of shocked at seeing that appear, and certainly the great fear of the Pinecrest, if it goes through, being right on the street is going to be very jarring. And I don't think that, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Darcy St. Ange. I live in 5 Points. I just want to thank you for Mark, especially for your presentation. It was very thorough, stellar job. One thing that made me a little nervous is that there was no mention of students when you spoke, and this is one meeting that I've been at. This is all very new to me. So forgive my ignorance. I'm sure you've talked about students a lot and how they impact our neighborhoods. But it just was a little concerning to me that you didn't mention students. I used to live on Cloverhurst. I now live on Mill Street, and I moved to Mill Street specifically because I wanted to live in a mixed kind of area, and it was very different than Cloverhurst. And on Mill Street, it's a historic district, and so I'm in a historic house. On my street, I think there are 10 structures, and I think 5 of them are single family zoned, and then we have 2 duplexes, 2 quadruplexes, and one I think is like a triplex with an accessory building in the back that's also housing. All of the ones that aren't single family zoned are occupied by students. So when I hear that we're this mixed complex kind of thing, that's what I hear. It's like more students moving into my neighborhood. And actually even the house next to me, which is single family zoned, zoning didn't protect that. So we've been like fighting with the zoning people and with the owners of the house to not have students live in that home because it is zoned for single families. And currently, well, last year, I think there were 6 kids who lived in it, and the year before there were 4. So zoning doesn't always protect the historic nature of the neighborhood or the actual number of occupants in homes. So just want y'all to consider that as you make recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. there any other member of the public who would like to give input tonight? All right. Thank you for all who spoke. A lot of things brought up by folks, both in through public input and in our conversation tonight, that is very much looking outside of the future land use, looking forward to what will happen with zoning. I think that there's just a desire, a human curiosity, whenever we're looking at one step, to think 3 steps ahead. That being said, we are not going to be voting on zoning for the entire county. When we vote on this, we are only going to be voting on the future land use. A few folks mentioned the description, and I just wanted to at least speak for myself. This might apply to other people as well. I saw this very beautiful colored chart, and I was immediately on it. Like, this is what I'm looking at. This has information for me, and I love it. But some of the concerns that were brought up, very salient, made me think, well, let me go look at the big blocks of text. And they're actually very descriptive in a more qualitative rather than quantitative way. I highly encourage a close read of those. There's some interesting conversation about Pinecrest, which we don't need to talk about behind the rail tonight, but definitely interesting and worth considering. I recommend people watch that meeting, the conversation that happened, if you hadn't. I know some of y'all were here, some of y'all weren't. So given this public input, how do we feel about voting on these deliverables, voting on a recommendation and sending them on to the Mayor and Commission at the August 7th meeting? Does that feel like something that we're ready to do? Are there too many questions? Is there too much concern? Do we feel like not enough time? Matt, saw your hand.
I'm not, what I was going to say does not answer your question, but it addresses something else that,
Yeah,
a couple of comments that were made that I think are I can say something very briefly that may address them. I think it was Ms. Knowlton who commented about whether the pink area near 5 Points there includes parcels that are not fronting on Lumpkin and are on Millage Terrace, and whether this creates a risk of commercial development on Millage Terrace. And so I think that the answer is no, it doesn't. That's not going to happen. And here's why. And I think this is something that's important to clarify, is this is what staff meant when they said, this is not zoning. The future land use map is not zoning, right? We deal with zoning stuff on a monthly basis. I think we can all sometimes forget that the statement, the future land use map does not address zoning or make any changes in zoning. We understand a lot of what that means in a way that lay people may not fully understand. And one of the things that means is that though Millage Terrace is zoned, I believe RS15, maybe it's RS8, but I think it's RS15. And that means that all you can do there is single family detached homes on 15,000 square foot minimum lot sizes. Nobody's going to be able to come in there and put any kind of commercial development with that zoning, and nothing in this would result in any change to the zoning on any of those surrounding streets. So I just think, you know, sometimes people get nervous about will this cause other changes? And the answer to that, I think, is no. The second thing that example of something where my response is very similar is a couple of people spoke about setbacks changing, and would this change setbacks? And the answer again to that is no, because setbacks are provided in the zoning code. And nothing here is going to change whatever the setback requirements are. In RM1, I think it may be 15 feet front yard setback to the sidewalk. That's not going to change. Nothing here is going to change that. And so to the people two different people who spoke about that. just rest assured, the future land use map does not change setbacks. Only a change to the zoning code, which is not before us. And I think not going to be before us anytime real soon. Only that could accomplish a change in the setbacks. So fear not, for whatever that's worth.
Okay. Couple things. I was thinking about the setback question because it is coming up, and I think when I've seen mention of setback in here, it really relates to those much more commercial areas where, you know, you see that in any communities around the state who are redoing their zoning seem to be reducing setbacks in your commercial zones in a way to activate streetscape. It usually is, it goes along with also like sidewalk requirements and kind of public space requirements. So it's not necessarily, I mean, we do have a couple, for sure, a couple of places in Athens where I really don't like the zero setback thing. The Best Western on Millage is awful. And I wouldn't want to, I don't love that as the example of no setbacks. It's such a uninspired, non-streetscape activating setback situation. So I think once the conversation moves down the road to zoning, that should be talked about. The other thing I wanted to, I think, you know, not to spend too much time on one parcel in 5 Points, but the Millage Terrace parcel that they're bringing up is kind of an interesting example because I can't see it on the future land use map. But what I think they're saying is that that parcel is owned by the same person and where it touches Millage Terrace and where it touches Lumpkin. And so like what you were just saying, Matt, I'm not sure. So if it is being, am I correct in that the designation is neighborhood center? For that one, it's pink. And so if you look at, I think the concern is that by sort of, it's an example in the past of something that would maybe have ended up being split zoned in the sense that it doesn't, I think the concern is that allowing that kind of more commercial development out on Lumpkin could, by virtue of the fact that it is one parcel, I guess, which I didn't really ever realize it was, it's not.
I'm looking at it on the zoning map and I see what you're talking about. It's right next to Earth Fair and Ad Drug, and there's 2 parcels fronting on Lumpkin and a third that is contiguous and goes to Millage Terrace. And they do all appear to be owned by some Barrett Investment
Yes.
Properties LLC.
Yeah.
But the Millage Terrace one is half of that depth, and
Okay.
the Lumpkin fronting ones are half of that depth, and they're zoned commercial and RS15 respectively.
Okay. And the future land use designation proposed applies to the one that fronts Lumpkin only.
I'll defer to the chair on that. That would be my understanding. Yeah, it comes from
Okay.
Lumpkin.
Okay, good. Because in some ways, that's kind of related like to the discussion last week, Hawthorne extension. You had some old weird zoning that was coming through from Hawthorne in a place where it didn't seem appropriate today. So anyway, it sounds like we don't need to worry about that because that would be terrible actually to have that happen right there on those chairs. So I think that was also, does anyone from staff or maybe Alex from the committee want to, is there something that should be addressed or acknowledged regarding Amy's comment about sort of the role of affordable housing in the discussion?
Happy to. And I wrote that.
I feel like it's been all over.
Yeah, so let me touch on that. The guiding principles were related to the execution of future land use. So future land use doesn't get into financing. Now, the discussion with the committee was absolutely positively folding in economic realities. And that's part of the reason why we had Urban 3 come to town during this process, was to appropriately fold in the notion of economics, right? As it relates to land use. When it comes to affordability of housing, the exercise that was done here was creating opportunity for variety. So the more variety we can have, not just of housing, but of other things in appropriate locations, the more chance we have to create smaller units that might be more affordable, or units in places right now that are underdeveloped, which may help them be more affordable, or to rediscover some land that right now is overlooked. And maybe doesn't, or I defer to the many realtors in the room, doesn't have a price point that draws the $1.2 million interest. It is more affordable because it is located next to something that is not typically seen as something where, it's not this bucolic setting. It's maybe next to a parking lot, or it's next to a aging out single-story commercial structure, or it's the redevelopment of that single-story structure. So the affordability component was addressed by putting opportunity on the map. As a policy document goes, that is a significant first step, then allows for a variety of actions to be taken to achieve some degree of affordability, whether it's programming for redevelopment on these corridors. Maybe these sync up, and many of them do, with TADs, right? Or maybe these sync up with opportunity zones, or maybe these sync up with CDBG programming. And this becomes another piece of justification for doing something in Athens when the state or the federal government's making decisions about where to send money to help defray cost of development. Maybe this policy document helps build a case for coming to that location. But this document in and of itself does not do affordability. It creates opportunity for affordability.
Yeah, and I think that, we see affordable housing developers in here on a semi-regular basis, asking for things to do with zoning and future land use, who are then going out on a limb to say, hey, we want to build subsidized affordable housing here. But in order to do that, we need to run the gauntlet, and we need to perhaps face an angry mob of people who don't want affordable housing tenants living near them. And we have to convince the commissioners. We have to hope that they like us. And there's this great deal of uncertainty that, there's more opportunity in down the road from this map. And I think that you hit the nail on the head.
And that's really, I'm glad you said that, because it's been, to me, it's like foundational to what we're doing, what you always say, Bruce, is sort of that, that the way that this intersects with affordability is we're setting a table. And it's not even really just a belief. The data bears out that increasing housing supply increases affordability. Like, one of the problems is scarcity. And so anything we can do to increase supply in the right places where it's appropriate is by its very nature part of creating conditions for affordability down the road. So I think this is a huge step in that direction.
I just want to say, as one of the realtors in the room, to piggyback on the comment I said earlier, this does help us tremendously. It helps us from an economic development standpoint to be able to show the story of what we're trying to do with our county. And it opens up a lot of avenues for a lot of mixing middle housing that we don't currently have in spots where we have really no housing. And I think some of these new town centers, speaking to Bruce's point, in areas where there's really nothing going on right now, this really helps us be able to get out that story to those developers and say, hey, there's opportunity here. And we have a very thoughtful way that we want to grow.
Yeah. There was, I'll get you in a second. There's also a comment about, we haven't talked about students in this process, which I thought was mostly accurate, honestly. Like, I didn't hear a lot about students in that discussion. But to me, having been in this for years now, it made sense to me that students, we weren't talking about like where are the student nodes, where are the students going to live? Because students live anywhere. They live anywhere they want to. The only kind of development that you can really keep a student out of, the only kind of new development you can keep a student out of, is extremely expensive. The only way you can build something and a student isn't going to want to live there is making it so expensive that it's economically unfeasible.
I thought you were gonna say nursing.
Sorry.
Yeah, retirement communities.
Nursing home. Hey, students of all ages, man, students.
That's right.
Student-
There might be some students at those retirement communities.
Can I say something when you get finished?
I would love to talk to you afterwards.
Well, no, I'm on the committee and I would like to address the student issue. Unfortunately, Maxine Eason is not here. She probably has 5 volumes of hundreds of pages of everything that we did. We discussed students ad nauseum. I honest to God believe we did. And I don't think that if you build $1.5 million structure, that's gonna keep students out. And I think we discussed that.
Okay.
So, just as a person on
Yes.
the committee, I just wanted to address that.
Yeah, and thank you,
Thank you
and,
for letting me break in.
uh,
I wish Maxine Eason were here. She would really break in.
and,
Agree, Mr. Sams?
I
Thank you.
absolutely agree.
yes, I didn't mean to discount that I'm sure that y'all talked about it at length. Sure.
I was just
there's-
agreeing about Maxine.
Yes.
I still agree with you, but the Maxine.
Yeah, I'll hand it to you. There's absolutely, sure. There's nothing you can build. There's no type of housing that you can build that students won't want to live in. I know that, I live there. We think about the students, we plan around them. But that would be why they don't go into the guiding principles of the form necessarily of everything, because this is a college town. They don't stay in their boxes. They're human beings and they move around.
And they're assumed to be included in some of that 30,000.
And they are assumed to be included in some of the 30,000 additional people that we anticipate to come in.
Can I keep on that just
Yeah,
a
go ahead,
smidge?
go
I
ahead.
promise not to get long-winded. But yes, we did. We talked thoroughly about that. We have people on the committee that are involved with student housing. They were extremely useful. And so that was nice to hear. And by all of my knowledge, with the real estate license, we really can't say what type of person can live in a house. And the map will guide, we hope, but we can't say certain things and didn't, but we definitely rang that towel pretty hard to make sure we were understanding, because that is a force no matter what. So we address that in most any way possible.
I'm looking forward to reading the report.
And while you're talking, I just want to put you on the spot because I wanted to ask if you had any thoughts about Mr. Portier's comments about roads being land use, and maybe talk for a second about how transportation networks featured in your discussions on the committee, because I think they did. And I don't know, I just kind of wanted to hear what you had to say about that, because obviously we're not assigning future land use categories to roads, but it's an important part of what you all did.
Yeah, and it is, you take a Prince Avenue versus a Lumpkin versus a Gaines School, versus, I don't want to use Boulevard because we use that in a different kind of definition, but Boulevard and going in neighborhoods. And so we did discuss the speed, the number of if this is getting to what you said, the number of traveling that goes through, the in and outs. Prince Avenue, we looked at hard, and that's an interesting street because it turns into so many things in just a short couple of miles. And then all of a sudden you've got a few drive-throughs, and then you don't have any drive-throughs on the entire road. So that was addressed as that goes. We didn't go as far as some of the pictures did and put like a beautiful medium in between or any of that. That's nothing we addressed directly. I don't think it was in our wheelhouse to do that. But we did, and I'm going to take this opportunity, if I may, to step over here I was gonna brag on one of our members, but he left. So I will not brag on this. No, but I will say it was Kent Middleton, and he was next to the gentleman that asked this question about, and I was just impressed how this went, but it happened a lot. So we do our thing in a meeting, and it goes back to staff. Staff takes all of that, puts it in a form we can all come back and look at again and go over. And I believe it was Town Center on Gaines School Road where Kroger and all of that, we've given Town Center. And we also said across the street at the little strip center right there, we were going to call it a Town Center. And Kent was one of the ones that brought it up, and then we talked about it, but that moved over to, was it neighborhood neighborhood center, because it backed into a neighborhood. And so what I'm trying to do a little bit is Bruce is showing that. So you see the left side is not the same color as the right side, just to put it in simple use there. So Town Center is on the left and neighborhood center on the right. So that's the kind of detail that we did. We talk about it, we do it, it gets put into something, then we come back and look at it and go, not quite. Because the street, the way that is, the street is not the same on that side as it is on that side, but it might be to somebody driving through. But it backs up to a neighborhood where people can walk into that and not have to cross the street to go dine, because there are restaurants there. So that's a little bit of how that street, in a sense, was not just how it kind of did divide. Like we've talked about that in some of the zoning issues we've had or future land use in the past. So we did take it there. And then the other thing I just mentioned, that is the detail we put into this. We go back, we look at it. Somebody perks up and says something. Sometimes somebody says, no, I think it needs to be this. There are a couple areas on the map that the noise got loud. I loved it. I mean, that is what I wanted was the banter back and forth. It was all respectful, of course, but so anyway, that hopefully answered your question a little bit.
And can I throw something into this policy document is going to be used by public utilities in their capital programming. It's going to be used by Transportation and Public Works in their capital programming. It's going to be used by leisure services in their park planning. So all of these priorities that are being pulled and twisted and kind of understood and made plain are going to inform all kinds of other work of this government and our partner agencies, honestly. And one shining example of that is there is a Connect Athens grant that has been awarded. And we are currently we're going through a process to select a consulting firm to work on equity issues for this corridor that starts on Elps Road. It goes all the way up Hawthorne to Prince and includes Oglethorpe. So there is a sizable grant that is going to address equity with land use, and transportation is what's funding it, but transportation is a third tier consideration. It's in there, but the purpose of that grant isn't just to come up with new striping between the curb. The purpose of the grant is to revisit land use policy, development patterns, and how to have the transportation reinforce better land use patterns, addressing equity for access and also just neighborhood stability. So this exercise that's going through is not some static document. It is absolutely positively connected to things that are already in the chute trying to use this. So we had a meeting 2 days ago. They were asking, what's the timeline on this? I said, well, I'll let you know. That's what we're working on. But they want to use the community values that are expressed in this to help do the work on a corridor. You can't ask for more than that.
Getting back to Sarah's question that I blew off the first time, about whether we feel like we're ready to vote. It seemed in our next meeting on August 7th. It seems to me like we probably are. There have been just a couple of issues raised that I think I would want to see more detail that I cannot see on this map. And one of those is, they're both kind of the same issue. And Kristen talked about the Hawthorne extension area, and the same question was raised sort of about that Millage Terrace Lumpkin thing. And
I would just like to see a blow up of that. And I don't think this requires further committee work. This is more just, maybe part of what staff could show us in August. Just a blow up to, if what you said is accurate, that the minor corridor designation applies only to the, property on Hawthorne Extension that is a through lot from Hawthorne, that's one thing. But if it applies to anything that's not a through lot, then I would have the same concerns that Kristen expressed about that. And so I would just like to have certainty about that I just can't zoom in enough. My eyes don't work that well on this map to see it. The same thing I think is equally valid about the Lumpkin the 5 Points area, just to be sure that we're not inadvertently. And I gather that the committee has been very granular and looked at this kind of stuff very closely and carefully. But I think I'll want to do that as well. But that doesn't seem like something that needs more time. And if little tiny tweaks need to be made to address those sorts of concerns in those two areas, I feel like we can certainly handle that in August. So I don't know that further.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
think we're ready.
Yeah.
I do have a question about again, and I don't think this should slow it down either, is the decision process behind how the colors are presented, what order they're presented in. Like, is that random? Was it intentional? Kind of want it to match. I want this table I want this to be in the same order as that.
Yeah.
Like, part of me, so I wanted to know if there's any method behind it, because I kind of feel like it should go in the order of intensity.
I hear you. It makes a lot of sense. The intensity here is sort of serpentine.
Yeah.
It's not this straight linear sort of transect
Well, I
kind
was
of thing.
thinking about that in the ones that are, the ones that kind of more correspond with nodes on the growth concept map, or like, yeah, I don't know, maybe that's what.
Types of land use rather than intensity. Like you have these sort of
Yeah.
nodal places, you have the residential adjacent places, you have these sort of government institutional type places.
I would say this, I think,
Yeah, that makes more sense than what I just said, I think.
so the rainbow sheet. It was largely organized, and Max, correct me if I'm wrong, the minor corridor, major corridor, and the general business were together because they split out of general business on the current future land use map, the one that we're changing. So they were lumped together because they were taking that and breaking it up. And that's why at the bottom, it's government. So the format of that, was it intentional? Answering your question, yes, it was. Did it organize it by hierarchy? No, it did not. And there is a representation of intensity there, for sure. It does step down.
Yeah. I think I wouldn't sorry to interrupt you. I think by the time this lives by itself, these categories being subcategories of an old category will not be a relevant concept anymore.
And you won't be adopting that sheet of paper either.
Okay.
Like what you're adopting is all the categories, and we can put them in any order ever.
They should just be in the same order. These should be in the same order as this, should be in the same order as on the legend.
All right.
Yeah, at the very least.
All right.
And as far as how they're grouped, that's fair.
I would
It could
do
be
that
Roy
on
G.
Saturday.
It could be
Saturday morning.
It could be Roy G. Biv, it could be any of that, but it has to match up.
Good addition.
Even if these are not what will be voted on, but just more like understandability. There's a better word for what I just said.
So I could see why you all would make this distinction, but in your world, that makes sense. But outside of that world, no offense, it could be completely different and it makes sense.
Fair enough.
Does anyone else have anything else that you want staff to know before August 7th, that you want on the record? Do we have anything else that we need to say about this tonight?
Can I say one last thing?
You can have the last word. You burned it, man.
One of our best members, I should say, best members, most attentive.
There's no favorites.
Rank them all, please rank them all.
I wanna, anyway, Lorraine back there that had a few words to say, I'm gonna embarrass the heck out of her. Lorraine Fuller. And it's funny because she goes to everything. She went to as many of the public viewings and public input as I did. I think there were 2 you weren't there, but there were at least 2 that I wasn't, the 2 you were at.
I missed 2 of
Yeah.
those.
And I was at them and I saw you not there.
All 3 urban 3s.
Yes, no, she did all of that. And then I'll just even say, she saw me volunteering at Taylor Grady House and she was like, you're at everything. And then I go to vote the other week and she's at the voting, volunteering to do that. That lady does everything in town. So, recognize that face if you don't know her, you'll see her. So anyway, thank you very much. And I do believe you're the only one, else.
No, we've
Nope.
got.
Matheny.
Oh, sorry, David. And then there's David Matheny. Anyway. David, you're very much appreciated. I did not know you were in the room.
You can show your appreciation by wrapping this up.
John Joggins.
All right, we don't need any motions to do anything because this is a work session.